We've done it. We've done it. Here we are, streaming like a madman, streaming like a maniac. How you guys all doing today? I am doing actually really, really well, all things considered. Yesterday I actually had a day off for once, right? I get a few and far between these days, and I just basically slept, chilled out, didn't even look at the news, didn't do anything. And this morning I woke up with just like this massive, massive headache. And I think it is because I didn't have a coffee on Sunday. And I think I was experiencing coffee withdrawal. And how do I know that's true? Because the minute I had a coffee, the headache cleared up. I felt a lot better. I don't think that's good. I don't think that's good. But I don't know what to do about it, especially as I've got the coffee right here, right in front of me. Yeah, here we go. Coffee time. I'm exactly like my dad. Hey, Barnabas, how you doing today, bud? Good to see you. My dad is such a coffee fiend. He's like, he's gone on like road trips and made people pull over so that he can get a cup of coffee, like that kind of thing. I remember like he ran a business and he would always just have a pot of coffee on all the time. And I think at one point his doctor said like, hey, maybe pull off the coffee. And so now but he still does like half batches of coffee. So he has like the most watered down coffee ever, but it's still coffee, damn it. It's still coffee. I can feel myself getting there. I'm almost 40 now, man. I'm almost 40. It blows my mind to think about this. That like, I'm like halfway through it. And it's just like, I am older now than my dad was when he had me by a lot. It's just crazy to think about. Anyway, hey Nova Scotia, how you doing, bud? Good to see you. Good to see you guys. Hope you guys are having a good weekend, man. Hope you're having a good weekend. I feel as though the universe is finally aligning the stars so that I can get back into working out. I used to work out like between a half hour to an hour a day. I felt like I was like really kicking ass for a long period of time. Wasn't quite into that like cut kind of phase. I was like right at the bottom of that. You know what I'm talking about? When you're like ripped, you're like cut and jacked. I was like right on the bottom of that and just got kind of getting there. And then like COVID and like all the ridiculousness and all of this. But just recently, I feel like finally everything is looking to me like, dude, get back into that. Become that again, right? And I just feel like when I'm on social media, the universe is just like, hey, here's like jacked people working out. Here's some workout tips. Here's this. And I'm just like, you know what, bro, you're right. And so I like did some push-ups one day. I've done some sit-ups the other day. And boy, howdy, am I glad that I understand. You gotta start at the bottom. Hey, Rusty, how you doing, bud? Good to see you. Well, glory be and mercy me. Looks like it's time to surround the halls of power. Certainly the right wing thinks so. Certainly the right wing thinks so. They and look, man. Like, look how I think that they've more or less been successful simply because they've got the Prime Minister of Canada talking to them, right? Like. Yes, they're being talked about with like Nazi symbolism and all of this kind of stuff and so on and so forth, but the leader of our country is talking to them. Look how successful that movement has been, right? Like, and the very fact that Justin Trudeau feels the need to make statements, the very fact that he feels like he needs to create a narrative, the very fact that he needs to address them and address the nation with them shows you how powerful this idea actually is. There's not that many of them doing it, right? It seems like there's a lot of them because they have trucks and shit, right? Like they've got hardware. And when you look at videos, it's like all of them blaring on their horns and all of this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, there's not that many of them doing it, right? Like, and look at how successful it's been. And so we should be doing that. Like, would you like the Prime Minister of the nation to address your movement? Yeah, well, okay. You know what to do now, right? We there it is. It's right in front of your face, right? It's what I've been suggesting this whole time. Now, the far right movement is gonna fizzle out, and it's gonna fizzle out for a couple of reasons. Like this, I am more or less of the opinion that we should be looking at this as a learning experience. That we should be looking at what they are doing and asking ourselves, okay, what is it that they did incorrectly? Like, what are the things that they did wrong, right? Thing number one, they did not get ahead of their fringe element. Like, very much so. Like, the society at large, certainly the liberals, have successfully labeled this organization as a far-right fringe organization. I mean, it has the unfortunate reality, but it has the reality of actually being that, right? It is a far-right fringe movement. It has people like Pat King in it, for God's sakes, right? Right? It has people like Pat King in it at the central organizational of it, and it can't get away from that. But it didn't even try, right? It really didn't even try, and they only started releasing statements addressing the far right fringe elements in their group once it became obvious, like really obvious, that is how it was being portrayed. But like, I still think their movement has been successful. The fact that Justin Trudeau is even talking to them means that it has been completely successful, right? And of course, I like to always point out that like Justin Trudeau is standing up and decrying Nazism and Nazi symbolism and all of this while simultaneously funding neo-Nazis in Ukraine, right? So like, domestic Nazis bad, foreign Nazis good. Like that's the messaging I'm getting from the Liberal Party, right? That as long as the Nazis aren't in Canada, then we can give as much money as we like to them and they can do whatever they like. I think I saw a photo of Axon Battalion flag in the crowd. I wouldn't be surprised. We know that the funding that's going towards the Azov Battalion in the in Ukraine, we know that those guys are turning around and bringing support back into North America. So the idea that they wouldn't be connecting with groups in Canada is it's pretty unlikely. I think it's pretty likely that they're connecting. And that's what makes it all very hysterical, is that Trudeau is standing up and saying Nazis are bad while funding Nazi groups who then turn around and help fund the Nazi groups that exist here in Canada, right? Meanwhile, on the Hill, they debated sending 200 to Ukraine. Yeah, like, come on, man. The police are not policing the protesters because it might incite them, blockading the southern border in Alberta, and the RCMP is trying to negotiate with them. What happened to comply? Stop resisting. Shake my head. Yeah, well, and I mean, yeah, like, the police aren't going to do anything to stop these guys from doing this because they're white. Like, come on. If this was an indigenous thing that was going on, like if it was the First Nations people doing this, they'd be cleared out. Like we would have footage of it, right? It would be clear. Right? Like, the police have gone into people's homes, like indigenous people's houses and shit, right? I also think that if it was a leftist movement, like, the police would be far more aggressive, right? But because it's, like, truckers and you know, like, rural white folk, nah, we'll just... And honestly, like, another big lesson to learn from this is, like... By all accounts I have seen, they did not build this to sustain itself, right? Like, these guys brought trucks and, like, trucks and things like this, and they didn't bring enough food, right? This is why you're getting stories of these guys going into homeless shelters and trying to find food in homeless shelters and shit like this. Like, these people didn't bring enough food. And I think they genuinely thought that they were going to, like, land in here. Like, 50,000 people were going to land in here, and Ottawa would be able to accommodate them, you know? And so you're ending up with all kinds of ridiculous stories. And I really do feel like a lot of the people who landed in there were forced to turn around and leave because there's no food, right? Like, so they didn't actually plan to sustain a lengthy, sustained movement. Right? Nor do they have, like, a supply chain to actually get food to them, right? Like, these are necessary components to actually, like, when the Occupy movement happened, they actually had funding to be able to get food to the occupiers. There was a method to sustain the movement, right? And if you don't have that supply chain in place, then you will not be successful. And that's a big lesson for not only that group, for any other group who has the intention of surrounding the halls of power. It was our January 6th? I don't think so. They didn't storm the parliament. They didn't like break in, right? They didn't do any of that kind of stuff. Like, and near as I can tell, like, sure, they're obnoxious, like, sure, like, and there's lots of stories, like the Terry Fox statue desecration, the war memorial. People are really, really getting on them about the war memorial. Lots of footage of them, like, doing nefarious kind of stuff, but they haven't actually, like, broken into the parliament. That would be the tipping point, right? Which, in my view, is what keeps them credible, right? Like, you can dislike what they're doing, certainly, but they maintain a certain degree of credibility by keeping things within the realm of peaceful protest. How about protesting on your feet like most protests? Allowing these people to protest in vehicles is unsafe and madness. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly unique. Like, it's certainly, like, it's a really interesting protest for that reason, right? It's a really interesting protest for that reason. That, like, the videos that I've been seeing, and we'll probably see some later on as we move along, it's loud. It's loud. It's just ridiculously loud and inescapable. Like, if you live in the city of Ottawa, all you're hearing all day long are these horns blowing constantly. Like, it is completely madness, right? It is completely madness. But, like, at the same time, like, what can be done? Like, what should we do in order to prevent that from happening? If we even could. Hey Vince, how you doing, bud? Good to see you. All right, guys, let's. I wanted to show this one, of course, from Lacey William Herschel. It feels like what millennials have learned in the last 15 years is that absolutely none of our institutions are looking out for us, providing a safety net, or rooting for us to succeed. Thanks, Lacey. I absolutely agree with this. Like, that is why what I call what we are undergoing a project of abandonment. Like, not only do I believe that I don't believe that what we are seeing is negligence or incompetence. I think that this is a plan to abandon us. That is the plan. And we should protest. Yeah, as the taxpayers have to foot the bill for the cops. Yeah, $800,000 a day. Yeah, isn't that great? Like, isn't that fucking great? Well, and also, like, today's video was all about, like, what I find to be interesting about this conversation about their protest is that we're constantly being directed and focused on the far right element, like the Nazi element and all of that kind of stuff, which is certainly there, right? And we're focusing on it, and we're hyper-focusing on it. But, like, no one is actually confronting the reality of, like, the explicit statement that the movement is making, right? Open back up, right? Like, what a dark and sinister thing to be asking for, right? But it's only dark and sinister once you understand the class dynamic. And so the media can't actually confront it because they can't actually confront the prime statement and deconstruct it and discuss it, because to do so would be to have a discussion about class politics, right? So they can't talk about that, so what are they going to talk about? They're going to talk about the handful of guys that show up wearing, like, Nazi gear. That's what they're going to talk about, and they're going to shove it in our faces, and they're going to go over and over and over again. But they're not going to talk about, exactly, like, I want my Denny's, basically, but, like, they're not going to talk about, like, the reality that the capitalist system is it's a labor market where we are commodities and we sell ourselves to that labor market, and the market itself is owned by a small handful of billionaires, right? We're just not going to have that conversation. Exactly. They can't out themselves, right? It was literally named after the KKK. What was named after the KKK, Mocked? The trucker convoy is the most peaceful convoy I've ever seen. The way the mainstream media is saying it is so wrong. They are feeding unhoused. They are free food and free housing for those who cannot affect it. I mean, and definitely, like, I don't want to I don't want to... I do think that the mistake that this movement has made is that they haven't got ahead of it faster. And I think, like, what I mean is that they haven't got ahead of the reality that there are people showing up wearing Nazi paraphernalia. They're not actively pursuing it, and they're not actively getting ahead of that. And and whether that is because they don't feel the need to, or whether that's because they somewhat agree with it, or whether that's because it's an oversight, it's a mistake in no matter what, right? Like, you got to get ahead of that. Like, you got to get ahead of that. It's like if I were actually organizing like a leftist movement in order to surround the halls of power, which I am, but if I were moving forward on that, I would constantly be saying, like, yeah, we're going to have anarchists show up, man. Like, we're going to have people who are, like, going there specifically to vandalize and stuff like that. Like, and there's nothing we can do about it. Like, what are we supposed to do about it? We denounce it. It's not part of our movement. These people are taking advantage of our movement, and we, like, get ahead of that. Get ahead of that. Multiple reports of people being assaulted in the media, and the cops say it's peaceful, nonviolent. But I actually think that, like, every single protest and every single movement has that element. Like, Occupy was hit with that, right? The Black Lives Matter protests were hit with this exact statement that you've made, right? So, like, that to me is not what divides this protest from other protests that I've seen. Like, what is it about this protest that makes it special and unique, right? And in my view, it isn't actually the fact that they have a far-right fringe element, right? Like, every movement has, like, an extremist element to it, and you can't get away from it. You can't avoid it, right? That was true of Occupy, it's true of Black Lives Matter, the George Floyd protests, like, all of it. It always has a fringe, far-right or far-left extremist element. And it is unavoidable, right? So to me, the thing that we should be focusing on is what the movement is actually about, right? Because we've been kind of taught, or we've been moved away from actually talking about what the movement actually is to hyper-focus on its fringe elements, right? And yes, we can go down the garden path and be like, yes, nine people sit at a table, a known Nazi comes, sits at the table, nobody says anything. That means there's 10 Nazis sitting at a table. Like, you can say that all you like, but I think it's crucially important that we actually listen to what this movement is saying and critique that explicitly. Because what they're saying is terrifying enough, right? Everybody, we should reopen the economy. Ostensibly, we should remove all of these support systems, right? Like, let's be clear, these are right-wingers, right? We should remove the support systems, we should reopen the economy, and everyone should just sell themselves back into a labor market dominated by billionaires. This is what they're arguing for, right? And no one is actually addressing that. No one is actually taking that on, because to do so would mean to address class politics in your society. And we can't do that. Right? We simply can't. And like, if you so by doing this, we don't need to besmirch this movement. We don't need to focus on fringe elements. We don't need to focus on any of that. You just need to focus on what they're actually saying. Right? And that's bad enough. Right? Like, that's bad enough. If we were to do what these guys suggested, there would be a spike in homelessness, there would be a massive amount of poverty, spread throughout the society, right? Like, we have to do, like, I am not, like, philosophically against the idea of reopening. I mean, this inevitably does happen. One hopes. I'm not sitting here being like, we need to keep these lockdowns and mandates and all this kind of stuff. But, like, if it's not done with care, if it's not done with compassion and empathy, if it's not done with the idea that, like, the private sector is not going to be able to actually supply the society with what it needs, which is food and shelter, right? It's just not going to be able to do that. If we don't actually rationally talk about that and genuinely talk about it, then we're going to get into a really bad spot. And it's going to be a really, really bad situation for us. And it's frustrating that no one's actually talking about what these guys are actually suggesting. Like, everybody's just like, I saw a Nazi sign, and that's the end of the conversation, right? And I'm as guilty as that as anybody. But I think it is time to take their movement seriously, confront what it is they're saying, and actually point out, like, yeah, if we were to do what you suggested, it would be a disaster. Like, it would be horrible. And you know what? And we all know what their response would be. We'll just get a better job, right? Just go back to school, right? Retrain, right? Get some skills. What are you, lazy? Right? We know what these guys would say to us, right? Like, how do we know that? That's all they've ever said to us. And so we've got to actually confront that. And right now we're not. Not seriously. We're all like, there was Nazis! It's like, yeah. You're going to get that with right-wingers. It's not something you're going to ever not have. But if that's the only part of the conversation that we're going to have, then we're not actually going to have a serious conversation about what it is they're suggesting. Because what it is they're suggesting is now upheld by something like, 54% of the society now wants to reopen. Right? Majority of Canadians, 54%, now say it's time to end COVID restrictions and leave responsibility for isolation to those at risk. This is up from 40% in early January. Right? So we've tipped over. There's at least a 50-50 split. Right? So it's not a fringe position, what they're actually saying. And we're not actually having a conversation about, like, well, what will actually reopening do? What will that mean? What effect will that have? Because it will have a profound effect. Like, if we reopened everything, eliminated all supports, and just let the free market decide, there'd be a spike in homelessness like you've never seen. It would be enormous. And almost instantaneous. Right? But that's what these guys are suggesting. And nobody's talking about it. Right? Like, what does reopening actually look like? What does it actually mean? Should we reopen to this free market capitalist system that we used to have? Was it working? Right? There's a reason they want us to focus on the Nazis, right? There's a reason for it. Yeah, like, there are communists against mandates, flags everywhere I go. Yeah, CBC, why would they, right? Are not covering it. Are you there, Vince? Like, are you there? I hate how the media has framed what's going on. I have no words to show my distaste. Well, I mean, that's the media, right? That's what they're going to do. Like, people are hugging, children honking horns, playing around, and all the news, white supremacist, Nazi, fascists. Exactly. There are Indigenous leaders there doing powwows. I've seen some of that. It was actually seeing the Indigenous leaders doing the powwows that really softened my view. Like, really softened my view. Because it, like, all of these movements, and it's always the truth. And this isn't unique. The media always does this, right? Look at the most fringy of the fringe elements, right? And just hyper-focus on that. Yeah, it's fueling the narrative against the convoy. Well, because it's politically expedient, right? It makes the liberals look good. Straight up. Like, and the liberals can come in and be the white knights, right? We're here to protect you from the Nazis while we fund them. If Mark Holland really believes they've done their job, then do your job and end the mandates. Once you've ended federal mandates, then forward ends provincial and people can fight for a UBI, etc., etc. I mean, I'm of the opinion that I would like to have supports in before, right? Like, I feel like support should happen first. It's like telling me to jump off a cliff and then we'll put a net underneath. It's like, can I get the net first? It's the petty bourgeoisie thinking working is freedom. Yeah, there's a bit of that too. That, like, you're free because you can sell yourself to any master, even though there's only, like, really 3. There's still supports? Yeah, exactly, right? But 54% of Canadians support opening everything and getting UBI. It's not just right-wingers. Students are into college and nurses are fired because of the mandate. Oh, yeah. Like, it's chaos. It's chaos upon chaos. I'm 100% okay with reopening. Rehire fired nurses, teachers, stop making people unhoused because of the mandates. But there's a spike in homelessness because of the mandates and lockdown. People are fired left and right because of the mandates. It's more than just reopening back to business. I was not there, but I know people who went there, streamed it live with me. Yeah, there are tons of streams on YouTube. Yeah, of course. No, yeah, absolutely. And I might show some of those. Yeah, stick around. Ottawa Walks? That's a good one. I might check that out. They drive trucks to protest for this, but didn't do squat when the res school child cadaver started getting discovered in the hundreds. Yeah, No, now you're hitting on it, Matthias. Like, where are these guys when it comes to the issue of homelessness? Where are these guys when it comes to the issue of poverty? Like, where are these guys when it comes to the violence that's being done to the society at large by the system that they benefit from, right? Like, they don't care about any of that. Like, many of these guys literally are protesting so that when they drive by the restaurant they like, they can turn in and go to the restaurant. Hey Zed, how you doing, bud? Whenever a capitalist supporter says anything of concern, I always say, well, if you don't like it, why don't you leave the country? Yeah, turning it back around on them is kind of funny. It's kind of funny. All right, guys. There's enough of you here. Let's pop into the number draw. Let's pop into the number draw.
Here we go for today's number. It's January 31, 2022.
I'm going to go with an 8.
10
Feel like an
balls.
8. Got
Each
2 from
ball
Oddity.
has a number.
7, of course, from you, Mark.
Numbers 1
Oh,
through
me and
10.
Eziel, we've doubled up. Oh, we've tripled up. Holy shit.
Swirl the numbers.
Swirl the numbers. That means for sure we're going to hit it, guys. When we triple up like this,
Pick a number.
it's for sure an 8. If it's not an 8, then I don't know. The universe is a strange and unusual place.
Today's number is
2. Barnabas. Sure, we didn't hit the 8, but we hit the 2. It counts. Go get yourself a scratch ticket, bud. You've got the energy of David Lynch with you today. Let it carry you through into your life from now until forever. Favorite David Lynch quote? So it turns out God is gay. Would you like to clarify that? No. Oh, did Oddity also hit 2? There you go. 2 for 2. We did it. Double up. Double up. Double up. Brilliant. Brilliant. So, we are talking about it. So I figured lots and lots of people are there, right? And so I think I'm just going to do myself a favor. And I am going to read this aloud. All of these are links. If you guys want this, I'll put it into the chat. Hello. I've been making a list of everything that's been going down during the protest in Ottawa with the intention of posting it in threads about the convoy on other subs where lots of people are downplaying what's happening or dismissing it. I have no intention of arguing with them anymore or insulting them, but I thought I would provide them with the information so that they have to look at it while they comment. A couple people were asking about it, so I thought I'd post it here too. If this is not allowed, etc., etc. Protesters disrespecting national monuments. Disrespecting veterans by first parking on the war memorial, then dancing on the tomb of the unknown soldier, finally peeing on the National War Memorial, right? They also disrespected the Terry Fox statue. This tells you more than anything that the movement that they have going on is not disciplined. Right? It's not disciplined. That it is very much a rabble. So, protesters exhibiting racist, homophobic, and transphobic behavior, defecating on the front steps of a couple's home after yelling at them for flying a rainbow flag in their window. That's fun. Protesters holding transphobic signs, extorting soup kitchens, and assaulting a member of the shelter community. Racial slurs were also thrown at a security guard who tried to stop them. Racial slurs were also hurled at a pandemic from a truck that was part of a convoy after rocks were thrown at an Ottawa ambulance, comparing being unvaccinated to racial segregation, right? But like none of this is new is the thing, right? Like, I mean, it just seems like it's really at the forefront now. Like it's really at the forefront. Protesters pretending to be Indigenous people and chanting, yelling, yabba dabba doo. Flag of the Tree Percenters, a listed terrorist entity wrapped over the hood of a truck parked by the hill, protester with the flag of the Canadian Nationalist Party, multiple sightings of swastika and Confederate flags. Some of the organizers of the protest are white supremacists. This is what I think is actually crucial, right? Like all of the stuff that I just listed, I'm like, I expect to see that. Like, I'm not actually blown away by any of that. But what's more important is to know who the central organizers are. And you got guys like Pat King, says white people have the strongest bloodlines. Here he is again saying the event can only be ended by bullets. Here he is again saying that they will target politicians' homes. Another organizer, B.J. Titcher, compared Islam to a syphilis. He has a long history of Islamophobia. Recall also that on the anniversary of the Quebec mosque shooting, the vigil was cancelled due to safety issues because of the convoy. Finally, a reminder that part of the goal of this was to overthrow our democratically elected government. Disclaimer, I didn't vote for them. I've actually never voted for the winning federal party in any election. However, I support democracy and would never support a protest that aimed to overthrow the government simply because another party was leading it. I will be copying and pasting, yabba, yabba, yabba. And then even better, politicians who have supported this. Erin O'Toole, Candice Bergen, Pierre Poilievre, right, over and over and over again. Interesting, he had something different to say about Indigenous blockades. Andrew Scheer, Michael Cooper, Jeremy Patzer, Scott Moe. And I feel like these endorsements are going to haunt these guys. Like, I feel like they're going to be haunted by it. So, yeah, of course it's a negative post, right? Like, it's natural for people to focus on that kind of stuff. But these people are fairly central to the movement, near as I can tell. You can go listen to Pat King. Like, he's pretty open about all of this stuff. And I'd be curious about a separate perspective, Vince. I really would. Like, I really want to see, like, and because everything I'm seeing is just noise, right? Just anytime I see any of the walks or anything like this, it's lots and lots of noise. And, like, what you expect. And again, I'm not bringing this to the fore in order to, like, I expect to see this sort of stuff, right? That's my expectation. Bit surprised to see, like, Erin O'Toole, Pierre Poilievre come out in support of it. That is actually a bit surprising from my perspective, because they're setting themselves up, right? Like, the Liberals have successfully managed to put in the forefront of people's minds about what this movement is as, like, a neo-Nazi movement. Like, that's what they've managed to achieve, and it's in the forefront of people's minds. And so for Erin O'Toole to come out in support of it, it's like setting himself up to be slam dunked on, right? And I mean, watching the live stream, seeing people hugging, dancing together. They had a massive dance party Friday night. Did the CBC CP24 cover that? Nope. Because, and we know why, right? We know why. Like, they wanna besmirch the movement, right? Did you see the new Ledger poll? Jug made it 28%, is tied with Bernier at 75% or something. Hold on. Ledger poll. Federal? Oh, that's fairly new. I don't really pay too much attention to these kinds of polls like this laid out because it's like forever out, right? Like, voting intentions. I love this kind of stuff, though. What do we got? So total looks like 34%, 31%, 18%. Yeah. Trudeau is tied with Maxime Bernier as a favorite leader. Oh, okay. You're talking about, like, favorability of leaders. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything here. So we'll just move on, but it's fine. That's just a Reddit thing. This is actually the most interesting thing, is that over 50% of people are now saying, like, we want to open it up. Like, we want to open it up. But I don't think they know what they're asking for, ultimately. And I mean, you've got to respect the protest as a expression of rage, right? It's just an expression of people's angst, mostly. Oh yeah, I mean, Trudeau is looking like a weak leader, frankly. Like, and honestly, more and more, like, the fastest way news spreads is still word of mouth, right? Like, really think about this. This is really crucial for people to understand, right? And the more you understand this, the more you can see it in effect. That we live in a highly propagandized society. We live in a society that has like overwhelming media dominance. The media dominance that exists is really not divided on very crucial issues, and those crucial issues being issues of class, right? They don't report on lots of things, or if they do report, there's a lot of omission and all of this kind of stuff. And you think about how overwhelmingly dominant it all is, but the reality is that word of mouth is still the fastest way to get information to travel. And also, if a person hears a piece of news or hears something from someone who they trust, they're more likely to believe it and they're more likely to go along with it, right? So news that the Trudeau administration is funding neo-Nazis, right, in Ukraine, like, as much as they're trying to suppress that or ignore it or not pay attention to it, it's spreading around, right? People are seeing it. It's there. And, like, that is one of those very kind of key issues, I think, that will actually change people's minds. Like, will liberals continue voting for a party that is actively funding neo-Nazi groups? Like, in my view, all they need is to hear about it, right? And I understand why they haven't heard about it, but, like, to me, it's only a matter of time, you know? And so what that means is that every single time you actually tell someone about this stuff, you're doing God's work. You're doing the good work. Denmark, UK, Czech, Ireland, soon Spain going to open up, no masks or vaccine mandates. Denmark open up tomorrow fully. Nobody wants to remain in lockdown anymore, I think. Yes, that is what it really is. People are not getting CERB, CRB, while also being locked down, no jobs. If we're in a lockdown, we should be brought back to CERB. 2 months without any CERB made it harder for people to pay bills. That's why I think people are tired of being in debt, want to get money. And honestly, I just think it's like, people are over it. Like, people are over this. That, like, Omicron doesn't seem to have been... Like, lots of people are looking around at each other and being like, this doesn't seem so bad. Like, that's really what it's coming down to. Like, this doesn't seem so bad, you know? And I think a lot of people... And this is fundamentally how the Spanish influenza was dealt with, right? People just eventually said, fuck this. And they just started going back to work and doing shit. And, like, the government could be like, if everybody in the society, if even 50%, like, we've got a poll right here that says 50% of people want to go back to reopening and all of this. And if all of those people just started doing it, well, what are you fucking going to do? What are you going to do? You're going to round them up? Like, what are you going to do? Like, genuinely, like, what are you going to do? You know, you can't control that shit. That, like, if 50% of the society just started acting like it's over, it's done, we're finished here, then it is. It really, like, I mean, reality will assert itself and there will be negative consequences and all those sorts of things. But, you know, like, people will just say fuck it eventually. And that's, we're there. Like, we're there. People are saying fuck it. Like, they're ready. And it doesn't matter if you dig your heels in, and it doesn't matter if you say, like, hey, we need to keep this up. Like, we need to keep going. Like, health and safety, all this kind of stuff. Like, there just comes a point where people want to fucking live their lives. You know? People want to fucking live their lives. And it's hard to be mad about it. Like, I don't think it's the right decision. I certainly don't think that it's the right decision given the configuration that we live under with the capitalist system, the way that it is. But, like, what are we going to do about it? Hey, Eric, how you doing, bud? And all you can do and all I can do, right, is just keep up your own personal health and safety stuff, right? Like, wear your mask, get your vaccines, right? Like, do everything you can to stay safe for yourself and keep everybody else around you safe. But now we're getting reports... Oh, first of all, good old comrade Mario. If you don't feel like you belong in this world, it's because you were meant to build a better one. Isn't that nice? But now we're getting reports. Justin Trudeau has tested positive for COVID-19, right? But like, in my view, this is only fueling the people who are saying, let's just reopen. Like, Justin Trudeau said, like, the report has come out that he has COVID-19, and then he addressed the truckers, like, a day later, right? Or that day. And it's like, he looks fine. Like, that's a big narrative that's coming out, by the way. People are like, well, Justin Trudeau got it and then fucking talked to a bunch of people. He looks fine, right? Like, and it's only fueling people's desire to reopen and get things going back again, right? And given that the capitalists want us to reopen, like they wanted us to never close down. So, of course, like as the tension builds, they're going to move in that direction, right? Less than 70% of UK is fully vaxxed. Over 70% is Canada. So it makes no sense for Canada to get harsher when Ukraine is literally lifting everything. What I'm worried is the article NDP presses forward for vaccine mandate for all health and education workers. Lots of anti-lockdown libs are going to vote PC because he will left mandates. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to this mandate issue, right? Like, I actually don't think that a mandate is required or necessary. Like, how serious has this been? And that's actually something, like, I haven't been able to find it, or I haven't taken the time, really, to dig around and figure it out. But, like, I would love to see a comparison between, like, 2010, how many flu cases were there, how many people died of the flu, right? That we lived with for decades and decades and decades. And I'd like to see a comparison between that data and the data that we have for COVID. Like, how much more serious has COVID been, right? I know, why would anyone trust the Liberal government of the past 7 years, right? Well, 25% of the society still does for some reason, right? 25 to 30% of the society is still voting Liberal, right? Like, and for whatever reasons, oh, here we go. Matthias, coming out hot. What's worldometer.org? Worldometer.org. What is this showing me, bud? Let's see. Oh, okay. So we're going to .info. Connection not. Okay. I'm out. Sorry, bud. Nope. They also have an effective Abdala vaccine, way more effective than Pfizer, Moderna. Yeah, I mean, Cuba has like 3 times the doctors we have. This is the big talking point that I think nobody's actually hammering on, right? Is that like what this is showing us is how weak our healthcare system actually is, right? Like that's the big thing. That like we have an underfunded healthcare system. Right? Like, it's clear that the healthcare system, the reason why it's so overwhelmed isn't because the crisis has been so bad. Like, don't get me wrong, it's been a bad crisis, but it's because the healthcare system wasn't ready for it, wasn't up to snuff, right? And there's plenty of evidence to show that that's the case. Like, we're below fucking Cuba, for God's sakes, like a small little island nation. Yeah, China built a hospital 10 days. Brampton has not had another hospital in 15 years. Yeah. Oh, excuse me. Hey, Grinning, how you doing, bud? Both my in-laws have COVID. One is in the hospital, and the older, weaker one is just lethargic. It's all a bit of a crapshoot. Yeah. Yeah, dude. And then you're also talking about, like, we have, as a society, been talking about the mental health side of it. Even the conservatives have been talking about the mental health side of it. But, like, I think that they've just been doing lip service to it, right? That's really all we've been doing as a society, is paying attention to the lip service. Like, this has been a traumatic mass experience, right? We, as a people, we have had a traumatic experience together, right? And, like, we're going to be talking about this for a fucking long time. Like, a long time. Even if today we all just decided it's over, we're moving on, right? Like that we're going to treat this like the flu. That's the scale that we're going to put it back down. instead of it being like the 8 or 9 that it's been for the last couple of years, we're gonna put it back. We're gonna put it down at like 2 or 3, right? Like that's the scale that we're gonna put it back down to. Put it down to where we were at with the flu, right? Like the flu is bad. Everybody knows. It's like, oh yeah, the flu, but like we didn't stop our whole life for it, and but the trauma that we've all experienced together, right? And a lot of that trauma is the realization that the systems that are in place are not there to support us, right? Like we ended up with support systems very briefly, right? As like an emergency measure, right? But as someone who experienced that, right? Like as somebody who was working as a frontline worker, as a retailer, going through the process of that, it was always very shoestring. Like everything was just like, am I actually going to be supported? Am I actually going to be able to pay my rent? Like it was a major upheaval. And it has led, of course, to what's being called the Great Resignation, which is an aspect of that trauma where it's literally every man for themselves. It's just everything for themselves. Didn't a sub-Omicron variant just come out? Oh my God, did it? Of course it did. Like, of course it did. Like this, and what you're touching on, Barnabas, is the other kind of side of it, which is like, I think the reason why people's attitudes about this have shifted so much is that Omicron gets this narrative about it that it's not so bad, right? Like it's not so like, yeah, it doesn't hurt you so much, and oh, good. It's even more transmissible now. Great. No, great. It's even more transmissible. Like, all that's going to happen is a kick up of deadliness, right? Just a kick up of deadliness, right? Like, get like an Omicron subvariant that's like twice as deadly, or even 1.5 times as deadly, right? And we're going to be right back into it. And I understand why people want it to be over, but if I was a betting man, right, I would be betting that we're gonna this time next year we'd be back into lockdown. Like, yeah, because we never took this seriously in the first place, right? And that's a really fair point, Harry, what you're saying here. During the 1918 pandemic, we didn't have mass international travel. The majority of the population lived in rural areas. This is a different beast to tame. Completely fair to say that, right? Like the comparisons to the Spanish influenza are broad. Like it too was a pandemic, and this is also a pandemic. But you're right. Like the situation is so difficult, and this is why I'm so. And I say it over and over again, guys. Like when it comes to this COVID-19 conversation, I'm so forgiving. Like I'm so forgiving. Yeah, why can't we have fun viruses? Exactly, Major. Come on, man. Why can't we get a virus that makes us all feel like, gives us like fun little hallucinations or something, right? Like, why can't it be like a low dose mushroom trip? Why is it always got to be like, you're going to die? Like, fuck, come on, give us some of the happy viruses. And the reason why, though, I get really forgiving on a lot of sides of this is because there's so much. And in North America, like the thing that we have to acknowledge, right? We have to acknowledge is the reason why this had got out of control and the reason why things have gotten so bad is because we have fostered a culture of dishonesty and we have fostered a culture of mistrust, right? The populace has gotten used to the idea that political leaders will mislead them for personal gain, right? And if you live in a society like that, and suddenly there's the government saying, hey, you've got to take this, you got to get this needle, get this shot. Yeah, I think it's completely reasonable to be skeptical of that. It's completely reasonable. And don't get me wrong, there are definitely people in the conversation who like are kind of kooky, right? Like people saying that COVID doesn't exist, like that kind of thing. But at the same time, you really got to ask yourself, why are there so many people saying that COVID doesn't exist, right? And the only answer that makes any sense is that we have created a culture of dishonesty and mistrust. Nobody trusts anything anymore. Nobody trusts anyone anymore, right? People are willing to fucking listen to Joe Rogan, for Christ's sakes, when it comes to this sort of stuff, right? Like, really fucking think about this shit. Like, people are tuning in and listening to goddamn Joe Rogan instead of, like, their doctor. But then there's also the point, like, nobody can go see their doctor. Like nobody can actually go see a doctor in the first place. It costs them $1,000. Like, no. I was watching a video where a doctor was saying that the way that China administered the vaccine reduces some health problems because the current way they administer the vaccine is the wrong way. Well, how so? That's interesting. The R naught of Omicron is greater than 7. That's more than mumps territory. Yep. And all this thing has to do is mutate once the wrong way, right? Like, that's all it's got to do. Just mutate once the wrong way. And, like, all of this, like, just reopen, whatever, everything's totally fine. Well, every single time it transmits, it's given an opportunity to mutate, right? Yeah, MMA equals healthy. Yeah. That virus is called THC. You got it, bud. As well, we're simultaneously having an economic collapse. We've had both, yet not at the same time. Yeah. And, the pandemic has accelerated the normal, like, the way that the society was going and the way that the economy was going. Well, the pandemic has just accelerated that, right? And you see expressions of this in, here you go. Workers lost $3.7 trillion in earnings during the pandemic. Women and Gen Z saw the biggest losses. Meanwhile, the world's billionaires get richer by $3.9 trillion during the pandemic. Like, what do you fucking think happened here? Like, this doesn't take a fucking brilliant mind to think about this, to, like, really put this through. This is a project of extraction and a project of abandonment. That's what it is. That when the pandemic hit, we experienced a heist where all of this wealth was extracted up into the upper echelon. And what is that doing? It's fucking with the entire economy. Right? People can't afford shit anymore. And the entire system is gearing itself. Like, why would you set your prices so that people who can't afford your stuff can buy it? Right? You're going to set your prices for the people who can afford it. And if it's only a small group of, like, millionaires and billionaires that can afford anything, well, then set your prices high. You might as well. And who cares about the people who are getting chased out of your economy? Because those people were chased out of your economy anyway. All they were buying in the first place was rent and food, right? Like, that's really all they were buying. Like, a couple of luxury goods, right? Like, get a little bit of booze, get a little bit of drugs, buy a video game or a movie every so often. But, like, that's basically their level of consumption that they're going to be at. So they're not going to buy anything more than that. So if you create something for someone to buy who has the money to buy it, then you set the price really high. And now that logic is starting to affect our housing market, right? And we're not doing anything about it. Like, that's where it gets really scary, right? Like, we're literally doing nothing about it. Yeah, exactly. Just should have been born rich, right? Just stop being poor, guys. Just start being poor. Just stop being poor. Theatrics everywhere, yeah. I don't want to reopen so capitalism falls. Well, everyone's thinking it. Like, we're in that period, like, when you play a game of Monopoly, right? And you get down to the last 2 players, right? Well, they roll, it doesn't just end, right? There's like an hour of them, like, rolling and then moving and then rolling and then moving, and they trade money back and forth, and it rolls and moves and rolls and moves. And it's extremely tedious, and it takes a long time before it finally reaches its culmination, right? And that's the period we're in. We're in this tedious, grinding moment. And the question is, like, why do you think when Elon Musk gets past Jeff Bezos in terms of earnings, he gloats about it? Because he understands that, oh, I'm in the lead, and that means that I have the better chance at actually becoming the winner of this game of Monopoly that we're all playing, right? It's a house, Michael. How much could it be? 3.6 million? Easily the best line from that entire show, if not ever written for television. It's a banana, Michael. How much could it cost? $10? Fucking genius. Yeah, the US, when the pandemic first hit, weren't they charging $16 for mask? I don't know, but it sounds right. Sounds right. There's all kinds of stuff that happened during that first period of time. Like, remember the toilet paper rush, right? Where everybody ran out to get as much toilet paper as they could and created like a run on toilet paper. And then other people actually did start hoarding hand sanitizer and masks. And the police went and seized the hand sanitizers and masks from the people who were hoarding it, leading the rest of us to be like, well, how about you do that to like housing? Like, how about you do that to a bunch of other stuff? No, it's just specifically this. Interesting. Right? So, yeah. What a time. What a time. Okay, I'm gonna move on from COVID because I can only talk so much about COVID. I think I'm going to read this one. Conservatives' party's embrace of trucker convoy is deeply troubling. One of the more graphic rape threats I've received over the course of my talk radio career involved a reference to burning off my clitoris. Wow, trigger warning. Sorry, guys. It was after I had addressed the false notion that had been circulating in conservative circles and was being bolstered by my talk radio colleagues, that Canada signing on to the UN's Global Compact for Migration would mean that Canada would no longer have jurisdiction over its borders, ensuring the ultimate destruction of our country because of globalists. There was a coordinated campaign to poison the discourse around the compact by pushing misinformation. It worked, largely by having considerable swaths of conservative politicians and media repeat and disseminate the misinformation for themselves, which is a lot like the current misinformation and disinformation campaign we're seeing regarding vaccines. There are consequences to peddling misinformation and refusing to overtly condemn extremist rhetoric, as any journalist who has had to counter misinformation can tell you. So it's especially worrying to see CPC MPs who are explicitly egging the protesters on by calling the Prime Minister the biggest threat to freedom in Canada, stating he has a vaccine vendetta, all the while turning a blind eye or making excuses for the more troubling aspects of the protesters and the extreme, violent language they are using. The vast majority of truckers are fully vaccinated. The truckers who made their way to Ottawa represent a fringe minority. Political parties looking to be taken seriously do not usually try to pander to fringe minorities that are increasingly out of touch with the majority of accessible voters, though the Conservatives are certainly the exception to that. This is exactly what I was talking about, right? Like, the Conservatives have kind of hung themselves here, right? This is an easy narrative for someone to come out with, and it turns the Liberals into the default vote, right? Gotta vote Liberal, else the Conservative will get in. There is a gradation when it comes to vaccine hesitancy. There is a difference between someone who harasses children entering vaccine clinics and those who have suspicions with healthcare more generally. It's obvious which side of the vaccine hesitancy spectrum most of these protesters lean towards. As the Canadian Anti-Hate Network has reported, some of the organizers and supporters of the Freedom Convoy have very clear far-right elements to them and are overtly advocating for violence. To deny that a sizable portion of this protest movement has hateful elements to it is either willfully blind or incredibly stupid. And you see, again, this is funneling directly into the narrative I was talking about. Don't talk about what they're actually protesting over, right? Don't actually talk about what they're protesting over. Talk about the far-right element that exists within the protest. This is classic. You can see this. It's true in right-wing groups. It'll be true about us. That cut and paste this article. Cut and paste this article, and it's exactly the article that got printed about us. Right? That's what I'm trying to really make clear, and why I want to read these things out loud, so that we can begin to recognize how the media operates, what it's actually doing to us, what it's actually doing to groups that show up. And an article like this, you could cut and paste and just put it right on top of us. That when the far left elements come out and actually begin to do vandalism and damage the way that is, that's an inevitability. And we can't control that. Like, we can't. Right? An article like this is going to get published, and the purpose of this article, you'll notice it, The purpose of this article is to simply not talk about what they are asking for, right? And what they are asking for is very clear. Open up. Well, okay, why can't we have an article discussing that? And why can't we open up, right? I am on the side that we shouldn't, right? I am of that opinion. I'm on that side of the discussion, and I have my reasons for it and my beliefs for why that's the case. But I'd like to see it discussed. And it's not. It's simply not being discussed, right? Instead, the truckers represent a larger problem for the Conservatives, who keep pandering to the extremist elements of their base. Every political party has its own gaggle of objectionable supporters. Ideally, though, a party's official strategy doesn't include trying to actively appeal to them. Once you do, it's hard to convince normal voters that your party should form government. All of this is made worse by the fact that our legacy political media has largely ignored the Conservative Party's increasing willingness to placate the more unsavory elements of their base, as well as the thriving misinformation and disinformation networks that are as Canadian as the tenacious little rodent we put on our nickel. Normalcy bias, the cognitive bias that minimizes threat warnings and ultimately leads people to underestimate the likelihood of an adverse event happening to them, is a heck of a thing, and the majority of our political coverage suffers from it. Our unfortunate reality is that one of the two parties in regular contention to forming government has sitting, prominent members who spew all sorts of conspiracy theory nonsense and have spent the better part of the last decade either disregarding the more troubling aspects of their voter base or trying to directly pander to them. Yet the dominant political narrative in this country continues to pretend that voters are choosing between the political equivalent of Coke and Pepsi. Canada desperately needs a healthy Conservative Party, not whatever this is. I mean, this is true. Like, that's what makes this so difficult, is that, like, I would like to see a healthy Conservative Party. I don't think our Conservative Party is particularly healthy at the moment. But I don't think that that's because they're catering to far-right Nazis, although they are, right? I think it's because they've been bought by a capitalist system, right? That the capitalist system has basically bought them, and that's the reason why they have no solutions, and why their solutions are basically just tepid liberalism, essentially. But notice, right? I am yet to see a single person even attempt to confront what this movement is actually about. Because to confront what the movement is actually about is to confront class politics. And they simply can't do it. Sorry, guys, I'm itching my nose an awful lot. I don't know why. Just sometimes my nose gets really ridiculously itchy. It's ridiculous. People individualizing their individualism. Yeah, all that shit. Then they try to bring then they tried to bring back the TP and the stores refused to refund them. Yeah. Which, I don't know. Like, that just means you have TP for the rest of your life. That's all right. Right? You're going to use it. Like, you're going to use it. From time to time, boomers are still buying out all the TP in my area. Oh, yeah. Just found the video about the vaccine administration. TP has risen in price by 25% in the meantime, too, yeah. I know that you said you wanted to move on from COVID. I thought the video would be interesting. Okay. If you've got a video for me, is it in the live stream or the general? And you're saying it's about the 21-minute mark? So let's...
A warm welcome to today's talk. It's Monday evening, the 17th of January.
Dr. John Campbell.
Now, I've been getting literally hundreds of questions about the relative advantage of vaccination now we're in the age of Omicron.
And you're saying about the 21-minute mark.
Because we know that on thrombosis after the first dose of vaccine, or neurological symptoms after the first dose of vaccine, you certainly would want to take very senior medical advice before you had a second dose. Certainly wouldn't be a decision for a local vaccinator. So good to see they're saying a no there. I've had myocarditis or pericarditis in the past. Should I still have a COVID vaccine? They're saying yes. Myocarditis, most commonly in young people, of course, is caused by viral infections. And when they go away, hopefully the myocarditis will as well, though of course people can be left with myocardial damage. But the advice there is, if you've had myocarditis in the past and it's unrelated to the vaccine, then they are saying carry on with the vaccine. Again, personally, I've been more comfortable with a cardiologist advising on individual bases on that, but there you go, that's what they're saying. Are there still unanswered questions? Yes, there are. Okay, so that's what the British Heart Foundation is saying in terms of evidence. Now let's just look at a couple of videos. The first one is a Canadian bloke with a tattoo getting vaccinated. Just watch that and just watch carefully what the vaccinator does.
Sorry, Eric, if I could ask, why am I watching this?
Canadian bloke.
Just like information.
And here we are. In we go. Straight in. No aspiration at all into Canadian bloke with tattoo.
Does Justin Trudeau have a fucking tattoo on his arm?
She must know she's being videoed. What
That's
about
hilarious,
Mrs.
dude.
Here's Mrs. Trudeau. Is she going to get aspirated? Inject straight away. No aspiration either for Mrs. Trudeau. It makes me uncomfortable to watch people getting vaccinated. Now let's look at a British bloke here being vaccinated. So this one's British bloke. In we go. Injecting straight away. Lots of photography, but no aspiration.
Okay, so
Pleased with himself.
Absolutely fine.
I don't know what aspiration is. Like, I don't know what that is.
And, this is a doctor who's doing the
done.
vaccinating
Fantastic.
here.
That is a...
But of course, it's not just any doctor. It is Sir Professor.
Apparently, the way they're currently doing it is the wrong way.
At the time,
Is the aspirated like where they pull out a little bit and
who was apparently happy to go on TV. Vaccinated, then
Mark, that's a good question, dude. Like that
not
COVID might
aspirated.
originate in a lab thing. Seriously, why
Makes
didn't
me
everyone just
squirm
dismiss the
seeing an
claim as
intramuscular
baseless?
injection
Yeah,
being
like
injected without
there's
aspirating.
no
Now, of course,
there's well, and there's absolutely nobody in it, like not nobody of any stature whatsoever that's going on along this idea, right? Like that there is the that there is the lab leak. Like people who are still talking about a lab leak, like I'm just like, okay, who's your guy? Like who's your source? Right? Like nobody serious is taking is talking this way. And yeah, it's an indigenous tattoo. Yeah, it has that look, right? It looked like the classic sort of eagle, the totem eagle. I'd like to know the story behind that. Did I see George Soros' new video today about, George Soros coming out with a new video. Yeah, I'm going to leave this open just in case we want to return to it. Cool source, by the way, guys. Thanks for leading me to this fella. Dr. John Campbell, right? Glad to see he's got a good following. He seems like he's a fella with a good head on his shoulders. George Soros, China, Xi. Oh, George Soros says Xi could be toppled. Chinese. So George Soros said, this is from the Financial Review. Chinese President Xi Jinping could be replaced once his economic and COVID-19 control policies prove to be a failure following the Winter Olympics. Billionaire George Soros says. That's a pretty big statement. Mr. Soros, the retired hedge fund manager who has long warned groups such as the BlackRock against investing in China because of its authoritarian regime, likened the upcoming Winter Olympics Games to a Nazi Germany propaganda stunt. Okay, so we're in good territory already, right? Like, right off the bat, you've got retired hedge fund manager George Soros, who is in the billionaire class, so has that kind of like psychotic element, right? Has warned groups such as BlackRock against investing in China because of its authoritarian regime, because of it has rules and follows them, right? Which capitalists hate that. Capitalists hate that there are rules to be followed. Likened the upcoming Winter Olympic Games to a Nazi Germany propaganda stunt. Like, the Winter Olympics are not a Nazi Germany propaganda stunt. Like, that's fucking stupid. Like, that's literally just like the stupidest shit I've ever heard in my life, right? Everybody who hosts the Winter Olympics puts on a big show. They make it a big propaganda thing, without a doubt. But the comparison to Nazi Germany is like childish. Like Soros has to have brain rot at this point to make that kind of connection. And the people who hear it and believe it are just morons. Like, straight up, like, moronic. Like Germany in 1936, China will attempt to use the spectacle to score a propaganda victory for its system of strict controls. So, to rephrase this in a way that isn't so stupid and psychotic, like literally every country that has ever hosted the Olympics, China will attempt to use the spectacle to show its society in the best way that it possibly can. Which is fucking normal. It's totally normal to take the moment when you're on the world stage to put on a show that everyone likes and go, wow, China's working out. Isn't that okay? Right? Like, fucking ridiculous. This is fucking unbelievable, man. Like, the fact that a person is walking around talking this way about a place that they don't know anything about, and you just know that because Soros is saying it, there's this whole, like, hierarchy underneath him that's like, yes, China is authoritarian. Yes. Like, that's what's happening. But the striking prediction from the 91-year-old who maintains China is the greatest threat to open societies in the world as his own society bombs people is the Xi regime could be replaced this year as his economy and pandemic responses fail. Like, I literally have no idea what they're talking about. So here's I love it because, like, just watch this article is gonna, like, go to another article that's just an analysis, right? And of course now it's paywalled, right? So, like, if you want to dig into the claim that China is experiencing this kind of thing, which, news to me, as somebody who actually pays attention to this shit, like, news to me, like, China is having economic problems, doesn't look like, bud. Like, doesn't look like. So it's just, like, a reinforcing, like, just wank, right? That's all it is. Like, yeah, China's gonna fall anytime, guys. China's gonna fall, yeah, anytime. Anytime. China's gonna fall anytime, guys. Yeah, it's gonna fail. Yeah. Like, how could it? Like, for real, like, how could it? Like, what would make the Chinese economy actually collapse? Like, Xi Jinping has many enemies, yeah, including George Soros. Although nobody can oppose him publicly because he controls all the levers of power. That's a complete misunderstanding of how the political system actually works in China. Yes, he's the leader. He's the elected leader through the electoral system that they have in China. Right? Like, the idea that he controls all the levers of power is a bit childish. There is a fight brewing within the CCP that is so sharp that it has found expression in various party publications. Mr. Soros just says, right? Can I get a link to that? Where are these expressions in the various party publications? So this is just said, right? Xi is under attack from those who are inspired by Deng Xiaoping's ideas and want to see a greater role for private enterprise. Probably not. Probably not. It's just yet another private enterprise grift. Privatize the system because Deng wanted to. Yeah, that was Deng's goal. Deng's goal was to privatize the system. That's what he wanted. Yeah. Xi elevated to same status as Mao. Mr. Soros' comments run counter to the widely held view that Mr. Xi will win an unprecedented third 5-year term as a leader later this year. Yeah. Like, that's likely. Like, the idea that Xi is going to collapse or topple or anything, there's, like, literally no evidence for it. And so at this point, I just need to ask, who is Soros trying to grift? That's all he's doing, right? Who is he trying to grift? Who is he trying to get money from? Who is he trying to make sure that the money stays put? Who is he trying to make sure that things don't wiggle and change? Right? Who is he trying to con? Right? Because any analysis whatsoever of what's actually happening in China tells you that Xi Jinping is very popular, that the dissent that exists within his own party is actually Xi Jinping going through and finding corruption within his own ranks. Right? So it's actually the inverse, that it's Xi Jinping going after people for corruption, right? And even the Financial Review article is telling you, like, Xi Jinping's probably going to win another term, right? Like, and there is a bit of grumbling going on even in China, being like, hey, it's time to get a new leader. Like, it's typical that leaders have like 10-year stints and then you switch hands. But the difference here with Xi Jinping is that there's a credible threat of war, and people are leery to switch leadership amidst this period when they need a strong hand to lead them through a period of security, right? A meeting of Chinese Communist Party officials in November endorsed his official re-examination of the country's modern history, which elevates his achievements to the same status of those of revolutionary founder Mao Zedong. Yeah, but China's going to collapse any moment, right? Like, literally the leader of the country is being elevated to the same as the founder of the party that ushered in the modern era, but China's also going to collapse at any moment, right? Mr. Xi has also silenced most detractors, which means public criticism of his policies is rare. However, experts say there's no way to read exactly what's going on at the party's top levels. Yeah, like, the party is designed in such a way to ensure that there can be no corruption at the top level. That's the whole point, right? Like, they saw what happened in the Soviet Union, and they know that it could happen here, or in their own country, right? They know it could go that way. And every time a man like Soros stands up and talks this way, it just enforces that reality, right? Mr. Soros cast doubt on the elevation of Mr. Xi's status. Given the strong opposition within the CCP, he says, like, who's the opposition? Xi Jinping's carefully choreographed elevation to the level of Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping may never occur, he said. It is hoped that Xi Jinping may be replaced by someone less repressive at home and more peaceful abroad, more compliant to the West. That's what this means. This would remove the greatest threat that open societies, the societies that spread democracy around the world, right? Like, if you're bombing Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia, Ukraine, where else? Oh yeah, don't forget all of South America, right? That's free and open society, right? This would remove the greatest threat to open societies today. They should do everything within their power to encourage China to move in the desired direction. The desired direction is subservience to Western power, right? Yeah, Soros, old man yells at sky. Pretty much, Harry. I think I want to stop here. Like, it does have that kind of element. That kind of just like old man screaming at the clouds. Doesn't really have... China is facing an economic crisis centered on the real estate market. This is just said. The model on which the real estate boom is based is unsustainable. In my opinion, the second quarter of 2022 will show whether Xi has succeeded. The current situation doesn't look promising for Xi, right? See, this is the kind of statement that is made by a person who is illiterate, like economically illiterate, right? Soros is suffering from brain rot because he's just always been rich, right? So he doesn't actually understand how an economy actually works. All he knows is how to make money for himself, right? And it's not hard to make money if you're willing to just be like, yeah, enslave this group here, steal all their resources, force them into labor camps and force them into a wage slave society and extract as much surplus value from them as you can. And if they get uppity, just abandon them, right? Like, it's not hard to make a bunch of money if that's the way you think, but that's not an economy, right? That's just extortion, right? That's just theft, right? Xi Jinping and China understand that people are your economy. Your economy is people. And as long as the people are taken care of, and as long as the living standards of the populace are always rising, right, then you've got a strong economy. So even if China went through a housing market bubble, right? Even if they went through this real estate bubble, even if they experienced that, well, it wouldn't have the enormous effect that it would here in North America, because in China, they actually give a shit about their people. Whereas here, if a housing crisis occurs and a bunch of people get thrown into the street and there's mass homelessness, well, who gets bailed out? Right? Is it the people? Do the people get bailed out? No. In fact, it's the bankers that get bailed out, right? The people get fucked. The people get told to go fucking eat a dick, like fuck off, right? And the bankers, they get $1 trillion handed to them and they get to continue doing this grift, right? And as long as you believe that your enslavement of populations is economics, then you can look at another society that's not doing it and be like, that can't possibly be sustainable, right? He pointed to Evergrande subcontractors who did not get paid, who then stopped working. So foreigners who didn't get their payout because China decided that what they were doing was not legitimate. And how people who had bought apartments started to worry that they might never receive the homes they were paying for, which again, China will, like, China has like relocated. He's complaining about billionaires, right? Like, that's what he's complaining about. My billionaire friends, they bought a piece of property there that might not materialize because the Chinese government wants to do something better with that land than subserviate themselves to the billionaire class. So the whole thing's coming down. China's adherence to a zero-case virus strategy that has led to harsh lockdowns for millions of people could also prove to be Mr. Xi's undoing. All Xi Jinping can do now is impose a zero-COVID policy. This involves severe lockdowns at the slightest sign of an outbreak. But this is having a negative effect on economic activity as defined by the West, right? Economic activity as defined by the West is the enslavement of the population and the extraction of wealth of their surplus value, right? Like, Soros has entered like psychopath mode. That if it isn't slavery, it's not an economic system as far as Soros is concerned. That like protecting the populace, health and safety, general happiness, right? Like none of that matters to him. It's irrelevant to him. The birth rate is much lower than the published figures indicate, because that's not happening in the West. Experts calculate that the actual population is about 130 million lower than the official figure of 1.4 billion. This is not widely known, but it will aggravate the real estate crisis, produce labor shortages, fiscal strain, and slow down the economy, he said. So, like, he's literally talking about a rounding error here, right? 1.4 billion. So if you have 1.4 billion, and you're telling me that the number is out by 130 million, that's a fucking rounding error. Like, that's how desperate these guys are now, right? This is how desperate they are. That they're just grabbing onto straws. They're just grabbing onto any straw they can, right? 130 million? Like, you guys get how much a fucking billion is, right? Like, and chances are extremely good that this is just a fucking bald-faced lie, right? Where does this article go to? Oh, another fucking financial review. How much you want to bet that if we were actually to read through this, which, you got to pay if you want to read it, right? If you want to verify these statements, these incestuous, self-referential statements, right? Oh, you got to pay for that. You got to pay for the privilege of finding out that we're full of shit, right? One might think that Xi Jinping, who collects personal data for the surveillance of his citizens more aggressively than any other ruler in history. I mean, what is the NSA, dude? Like, what is the NSA? Like, it is actually embarrassing. Like, Soros is like the definition of a person who has surrounded himself with yes men. He is bound to be successful, but this is not the case, Soros said. Yeah. Old man yells at cloud. Moving on. Xi's path to power and the skills he amassed to become the leader is astonishing. He understands how communities work together and the interconnectivity of economics. Yeah, that's the failing of Western economics, is that they refuse to understand that people are what matter, right? That Western economies focus on the item, right? Like, literally, it's like this cup is what matters. What we produce is what matters, right? That's supply side economics, right? Voodoo economics. That the item is what matters. Whereas actual economics understands that it's people first, like people first. And what gives things its value is how much energy and time and effort a person puts into something, right? That's what actually gives it its intrinsic value. And if you don't understand that, right? If all you care about is like, yeah, you made 1 billion of these. This is what matters. This is the economy, right? Then you can make whatever statement you like. China sucks. They're about to collapse. Also, China's mega power. Exactly, dude. That you're exactly right. Umberto Econ number 8, right? It's 100% that classic fascist tactic of your enemy is simultaneously weak and strong, right? That like China sucks, they're about to collapse, but they're also a mega powerful threat that we need to actually create a nuclear arsenal against, right? Like, you've got to present them as simultaneously weak, but also overwhelmingly powerful. There's probably more than less in China. Yeah. Just listen to the video further, and at the end he explains the importance of aspiration. Essentially, when you don't, there's a risk that you get into the vein where the blood gets into the syringe, and the aspiration will remove the blood out of the syringe. But it doesn't explain why it's bad. Ugh, gross. An author for the Byline Times claimed that eyewitness testimony proved that 5 million Uyghurs had already died. How people witnessed the deaths of millions of people, I don't know. Yeah, like... Look, here's the only thing you need to know, as far as I'm concerned, right? It's the same lie that they're telling about the 30 million people dead under Mao. Where's the refugee crisis, right? Find me the refugee crisis. So you're telling me that there is a silent genocide that is killing 5 million Uyghurs, right? And no one's fleeing. There's no refugee crisis, right? Like, if... During the Irish potato famine, right? 1 million people died. And that created an exodus of another 1 million people, right? So for every person that dies, another one flees, right? Like, that's literally every crisis that's ever occurred. Like, during the Holocaust, how many Jews were running from that, right? It created a massive refugee crisis that was observable and obvious, right? So where's the refugee crisis? Like, this is the only thing you need to say now. Like, I've been studying this for a long time. These last 2-3 years, I've been paying a lot of attention to this Uyghur thing. And the more and more research I put into it, the final nail, the linchpin that you can just like shut the whole conversation down is just, where's the refugee crisis? If this is actually happening, where's the 5 million people running? Where's the people fleeing into the countryside? Like, why are... Here, we just, like, easy mode this, right? Like, you should expect to see a major crisis in Mongolia. You should expect to see Kyrgyz... Like, here's the Xinjiang province right here, right? You should expect to see people fleeing into Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Pakistan, into India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Vietnam, all of this. Nobody's reporting any of that, right? Like, but let's keep it into Xinjiang, right? Because it's supposed to be a Xinjiang thing. So where are the people fleeing into Mongolia? They don't exist. Where are the people fleeing into Kazakhstan? They don't exist. Where are the people fleeing into Kyrgyzstan? They don't exist. So you're telling me that while Kazakhstan kind of collapses into its own kind of civil disorder and its own civil dispute, right? No one's talking about the refugee crisis that must be ongoing. Like, a government is rounding up and killing 5 million people, and there's fucking no refugee crisis. Like, this is exactly what I said when I did any amount of research on under Mao. There's supposed to be 30 million people dead, right? Famines killed 30 million people in China. I've even heard as high as 100 million people died in China, right? Under Mao because of the famine, right? During the Great Leap Forward. That's what we were always told, right? Okay, so the low estimate that we are given, it's between 30 and 100 million people. So let's just use the 30 million to keep things nice and conservative. Where's the refugee crisis? 30 million people died, right? So that means there's another 30 million people who are running, right? Where are they? Doesn't fucking exist. And exactly, Mark, the refugees are fleeing to China, right? Why does there need to be a militarized force that exists in Xinjiang? Why does there need to be these schools that exist in Xinjiang? Why are they doing this at all? Because of the fucking Afghanistan refugee crisis. Right? Do you guys hear about this war? There was a 20-year war that happened in Afghanistan. Well, guess what that did? Right? You have a war in Afghanistan where the CIA is going around shooting children in the streets. Right? It's going to create a refugee crisis. And where do those refugees go? Well, many of Kabul, right here, up the road, through the Wakhan corridor, into China. Right? Xinjiang. And so now you've got a whole bunch of refugees in your borders fleeing from a war in Afghanistan that you got to deal with. And how are they dealing with them? Well, let's try to teach them Chinese and try to give them some skills and try to integrate them into the society. Because what's the alternative? Drop bombs on them. Right? Like, where's the refugee crisis? Like, this is the only question that we need to be asking these people anymore. Right? Show me the refugee crisis. Doesn't exist. Oh, I took some pictures of the top of roofs, though. Guys, look at this picture of a rooftop. Scary music. Scary music. Another picture of a facility. Look, it's so suspicious, isn't it? Whoa. Like, I'm just over it. Like, I'm so fucking over it. China has every fucking reason to be pissed off at us. They have every reason to be looking at us and being like, what the fuck? Because, like, they're not accusing us of that kind of shit, right? When China doesn't accuse us of anything. China just points out the shit we're actually doing, right? And it's not hard, right? The genocide in Yemen, the genocide in Palestine, right? The bombing of Somalia, the bombing of Syria. Where's fucking Syria? Syria's over here, blah, blah, blah. Right? The fucking war of Iraq, the Afghanistan war, right? It's not hard to fucking, like, figure this out. Hey, how about the fucking crisis that's going on in the Mexican United States border? Right? Like, this is the thing that I think is actually so hysterical about this. That if the American people, right, if the United States started to teach the people that they have in their facilities, I'll use the word facilities to be kind, if they started to teach them English and teach them some basic trades, should we scream genocide? Right? Just Thanatos snapped those Uyghurs. Yeah, duh, exactly. You know what? You're right, man. Because you're right. Like, Xi Jinping has the Infinity Gauntlet, right? Obviously. So he has, like, universal infinite power over time and reality itself. But also China's collapsing at any moment, right? People want to believe it's real, though. Yeah, you can't prove them wrong no matter what. No, Ken, that's exactly right. Like, the people who are in on it are in on it. And they're in on it because it just is confirmation bias, right? Like, you've got a strain of xenophobia that exists in the conversation, and you're just not going to get over it. Concentration camps in Texas and Arizona. Yeah, I think it's fair to call them concentration camps at this point. Good point, John. Thanks, Harry. Gotta tell you, man. Being told that I made a good point. Did the Ukraine famine create a refugee crisis? Yes. The Ukraine famine created a refugee crisis. Abso-fucking-lutely it did. Right? How do I know? Because I grew up in Manitoba. There are Ukrainian communes all throughout Manitoba. You go talk to those Ukrainians, you say, hey, when did your family come over? They came over during the Ukrainian famine. Right? So there was absolutely a famine in Ukraine underneath Stalin. We just simply disagree about what the causes of that famine are. Right? That the claim, which is neo-Nazi, well, not neo-Nazi, it's straight up Nazi propaganda. The claim was that it was done intentionally. No evidence for this whatsoever, right? And to me, what it looks like is during the collectivization period, Stalin decided to seize land from the kulaks, who are capitalists, right? Land-owning peasants is how it's stated. And the land-owning peasants, I mean, so they're not just... Anyway, it doesn't matter. These guys were maintaining a labor market, is how they were running their farms, right? They owned the land, they owned the farming, all of this, and then there was another class called the Batas. I believe that's what it was, the Batas. And they were essentially serfs, more or less. But they weren't official, like, they were how we are. They were selling themselves to a labor market that was dominated by the kulaks, right? And the kulaks would pay them a subsistence wage to do all the work. And then they would take the surplus value of their labor and use it for themselves. That was the relationship. Stalin wrote an essay on this and create the justification for the collectivization of the kulak farms, right? And they understood that it was going to be controversial. Stalin and the people around him understood that it was going to be a big effort and a big push. The thing that I don't think Stalin foresaw, right? He didn't understand the depravity of the capitalist class as fully as I think he should have, because the kulaks turned around and burnt their own crops and slaughtered their own cattle so that Stalin couldn't collectivize it. This is what creates the famine in Ukraine. And by any estimation, once the famine in Ukraine begins, Stalin and his people do everything they can to try to alleviate it. The narrative of Stalin pulling grain out of Ukraine is absurd. There's no evidence for it whatsoever. The opposite is in fact true. There's a famous statement where Stalin says we need to get grain into Ukraine, and people say, okay, well, we need to do bureaucracy to account for it, and he says, no, hunger can't wait. Paperwork can. Right? And just load up the grain and go. Like, so the idea that this famine was intentionally done by Stalin is absurd. Right? There's literally not a scrap of evidence for it. We have the Stalin's archives. Like, we have all of this information. And what I am saying is actually completely accepted by the liberal side of the capitalist conversation. Even the fucking CIA agrees with me. Like, Stalin did not purposefully create a famine in Ukraine. Now, can you peg Stalin with a certain degree of responsibility for that famine? I think it's fair to say so, right? He was involved in the collectivization process, just like the kulaks were. They had a fucking civil war about it, obviously, that led to like a burning of crops and a slaughtering of cattle and all of this kind of stuff. But you can't, like, it's not a fucking genocide, right? It's not a fucking genocide. And so that's what's going on with the Ukrainian famine, what's called the Holodomor, right? But it's important to talk about because that did indeed have a refugee crisis, right? And so that lends a lot of credibility. Unlike the situation in China, right? Unlike the situation in China, this is actually rooted in a real event that definitely occurred, right? But again, this just strengthens my point in regards to China. Where's the refugee crisis? There was a refugee crisis in Ukraine, right? Where's the refugee crisis? Doesn't fucking exist. Like, it's a staggering claim. It's a staggering claim. Even Solzhenitsyn believed that the Holodomor wasn't a genocide targeting the Ukrainians. See, Mark, this is where your expertise is overwhelming mine. Solzhenitsyn. That name sounds familiar. Oh, was this the guy that wrote... He wasn't the Gulag Archipelago, was he? No. What did he write? Come on, published works. But yes, you could see. Right? Like, the Gulag Archipelago. I was right. I'm the smartest man in the world. But yeah, like one of the great dissidents, right? The Gulag Archipelago, right? The whole one of the major reasons why everybody is like, Gulag, oh, is this guy, right? And even this guy is walking around saying, like, yeah, it wasn't a genocide targeting the Ukrainians. Like, there really does come a point where you get to say shit happens, right? And when you look at the shit that happens, the question that you need to start asking is, what did leaders do about it, right? So, for example, when the hurricane hit New Orleans underneath George W. Bush, right? And New Orleans was underwater for weeks before they sent in any help or anything like this. Fucking Kanye West on TV saying George Bush doesn't care about black people, right? Like, that's shitbaggery, right? That's how you know there's a shitty leader that doesn't give a shit about a racial group, right? When a famine befalls Ukraine, Stalin's sending trains of grain, right? Like, did George W. Bush intentionally create a genocide here? No, it was a hurricane. Hurricanes hit places, hurricanes cause things, right? Shit happens. Did he do anything about it? No. Right? When natural events occur, and they do occur, and you can try to peg these things on human activity. The funnest part about this conversation is that the very people who are like, Stalin created a natural event, will also turn around and be like, climate change isn't caused by people. Isn't that fun? Isn't that fun? People died in Ukraine. Absolutely. No, and you can't deny that. It's not a genocide because many groups were affected. And also, like, human history is full of famines. Right? Famines occur. They suck. We don't like them. We hope they don't occur. We hope they don't happen. Right? But when they do, what you will generally find is that the leadership that's in charge do everything they can to ameliorate the problem. If you really want to see the type of famine and the type of intentional famine that is being talked about in Ukraine, you want to go to India, right? The Bengali famine that was caused by Churchill, right? That's what you really want to research. You want to talk about an intentional famine that was inflicted on a people on purpose? You're talking about Churchill's famine. Good to see you, Eric. Hope you're well. All right. Ugh, you guys got me on that rabbit train, man. Like, you see how easy it is to get me to fucking go down a rabbit hole with this shit? So fucking easy. I'm such a sucker. Some United States news, right? I thought that this was interesting. Ken Paxton, Attorney General of Texas, was on the Steve Bannon podcast. He said this, and I quote, "We're done in Texas if anyone can vote. Hashtag quiet part out loud. Hashtag fresh words." And I mean, what with the banning of these books that are happening throughout the South right now? Like, these guys have gone full fascist, right? Like, how can you avoid this? How can you ignore this? Like, it's absolutely incredible. All right, I think I've done enough about the convoy. Yeah, why are Republicans so afraid of the truth? Last read in 2012, flipping through the book now, and they understand why they should be reading it, right? This is the banning of mouse, right? You know, or Ethiopia being forced to grow cotton for the West instead of food for themselves. Exactly, Harry. Exactly. Teachers are already disrespected and underpaid for one of the most crucial duties and qualities of a free society is how educated the citizens are. Now Republican extremists are actually banning books and setting up tip lines to rat out teachers for telling them the truth. Meanwhile, all of these books will be removed from Texas schools by 4 p.m. today, scheduled to be destroyed, including books like 1984, by the way. Like, here in Canada, 1984 is like the classic conservative, like, everybody refers to 1984. Every conservative article that talks about China is like, in 1984, you're like, oh my God. Right? And I don't actually have a full list. I'm just looking at the picture here, but like, if you're banning 1984, like, you're off the fucking rails, as far as I'm concerned. Like, they're banning To Kill a Mockingbird, for God's sakes. Like, yikes. Yikes. If you're banning To Kill a Mockingbird, like, you're done. Like, you're finished. Like, I always shit on how we do not have a culture here in North America, right? I always shit on this point, that we don't have a culture. But if someone was to actually argue in favor of the idea that we do in fact have a culture here in the West, To Kill a Mockingbird is absolutely on the list. Like Mark Twain, right? You can definitely put up a fight around Mark Twain as a figure. Great American author, Huckleberry Finn, right? Tom Sawyer, To Kill a Mockingbird, Atticus Finch, Scout. That whole story is so perfectly written and so perfectly captures the hypocrisy and incoherence of American society during that period of time. Telling this beautiful story through the lens of a young woman, a young girl rather, who's growing up and trying to grapple with these racial realities that exist in her society. It's exactly the right story to tell kids. It's exactly the right story to tell kids because it's told through the lens of a child, right? And it's constantly hitting on ideas like Boo Radley, right? Don't be afraid of someone just because you don't understand them. And once you understand Boo Radley, he's not threatening at all, right? You actually are quite sympathetic to his position and what he is undergoing, right? And of course, the main thrust of the story being Atticus Finch's defense of a black man who is accused of raping a white woman, even though it's made extremely obvious that he's not capable of doing such a thing because one of his arms doesn't work, right? So he's not capable of actually doing the acts that they charge him with, and and he is found guilty anyway, right? And then is lynched before he's even sentenced, if I recall the story correctly. But like, it ends up being a very brutal story that's extremely effective because it has that kind of quality where it's so accessible to young readers, and then the issues become prominent as the story goes on. And To Kill a Mockingbird has brilliant moments of difficult tension, like when Atticus Finch is given the responsibility to shoot a rabid dog, right? That there's a rabid dog in the streets and it's Atticus Finch that has to shoot him with the rifle. And this raises very interesting questions. Like nobody accuses Atticus Finch of doing anything wrong, although what he did was an act of extraordinary violence, right? So there's this argument embedded within To Kill a Mockingbird that sometimes violence is necessary, right? You've got a rabid dog on your hands. What do? Right? You can't just ignore it. You can't just wish it away, right? You've got to take action. You've got to do something. What can be done? Well, at the time, the only thing that could be done. And it's these difficult conversations, these difficult situations, and these difficult choices that make To Kill a Mockingbird a desperately important piece of literature. And any society that is banning such literature is a society that you don't need to pay attention to, frankly. Yeah, if you want kids to read something, ban it. That goes for adults like me too. And now there's stories like there's stories. Ottawa. Oop, gotta turn this down. I'll pop back and forth from this as we go along. I do want to keep this up. Because you guys know me, right? Like, I love the China Walk stuff. Because giving you a real sense of what's going on. Are they also banning Margaret Atwood stuff? What are they banning all of her stuff?
No clue, I haven't seen any.
Or are they just banning certain things?
Maybe if a video surfaced, and we'll see that.
And let me know if the audio sucks, guys. I'll turn the audio right off if it's too bad. Apparently, Trudeau's personal photography, Adam Scotty, took the photo of the Confederate flag. Red flag ceases PSYOP. Interesting. John, critical thinking sounds a lot like CRT. Holy shit. Holy shit, Harry, you might be right. Critical thinking, critical race theory. They both have the word critical in it. This is critically a problem. Also, what happened in Reddit today, so many mods in R Canada, R Ontario, and R Ontario Canada got banned. That's news to me, Vince. That's news to me. I'm sure that I'll hear a lot more about that as I do a bit more research on that. That must have just happened. That must have just happened, because I'm not familiar with that story. Right? And again, guys, please let me know. There's a lot of honking in these videos. So let me know if the audio's bad, and I'll just cut it out, okay? I just want to leave a little bit of noise, just so that you get a real sense of what's actually happening on the ground. No, I'm trying to get across that Margaret Atwood be a part of the culture. Yeah. Margaret Atwood for sure. Like, she's I haven't actually taken the time to dive too deep into A Handmaid's Tale, right? But that's definitely penetrated. Like, it's definitely gotten pretty deep into the culture. Like, when people see, like, creepy kind of ritualistic events, that's the reference point for lots and lots of people. Rob McBean, good to see you, bud. Popping to say hi. Happy Patreon day. Oh, well, thank you, sir. I don't think I'm going to be able to sit through the stream. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Rob. Thank you for thinking of me, bud. I really appreciate that, bud. That's really nice. That's really nice, Rob. Ah, man. And good opportunity, I guess, to say, hey, guys, like, share, subscribe, right? Hit the bells, hit the whistles, send it around, share it, right? If you guys don't share it, if you don't tell anybody, nobody knows. If you're not a donator, think about donating to my Patreon. Even $1 helps. If you are donating $1, maybe think about kicking it up to $2, right? Just every little tiny bit helps, right? And if you have to make a sign saying you're a freedom fighter, you're not. Yeah. If you got to tell people what you are, right, then you're probably not that thing. Like when J-Lo told us that she was still Jenny from the block. I was like, are you though? You know, Jenny from the block? No, probably not. You can put the rocks that I'm still Jenny from the block. We used to have a little, now I've got a lot. All of this stuff. And also a little bit of a quick update on the channel. I definitely had a spike up of about 50 subscribers over the weekend. Right, I went from like 870 to 930 in the space of like 2 days, and it just was like, it just happened. So I don't know why that happens. Oh, my title says January 21st. That's it. The whole thing is discredited. The whole fucking thing is over now, Dan. Fuck. That's all right, man. I can edit that later. And honestly, I just use it as a reference point for myself more than anything. And thanks though. I appreciate that everybody here is trying to help me out. That's nice, Dan. Good to see you, by the way, bud. Good to see you. We're just walking around Ottawa right now. The Lions have arrived. Oh, Loaf has alt accounts. All right, we won't talk too much about that then. No, it was my own attraction. Thanks, Loaf. I appreciate it, bud. I do. Getting to that 1,000 mark, man. I've been saying it all along, and it's not. I'm not trying to encourage people to do that. Just so you know, I am still growing. Like, I still get people subscribing, so something's working. So as long as we keep trucking along, 1,000 is the magic number, and I haven't fallen into the pit of despair quite yet. So we'll see how it goes. I haven't read the books, but The Handmaid's Tale show seems like liberal propaganda designed to distract people from capitalism. It's definitely about gender politics, without a doubt. Like, without a doubt. It's about the patriarchy, is what it's about. And I don't think it's illegitimate to talk about those issues. I just think that those issues often get talked about in place of class issues, right? That we don't talk about class politics because we're so inundated with gender and identity politics, right? Yeah. Please God, don't do alt accounts. It's the last thing I want people to do, honestly.
Thank you all.
I would rather make it to 1,000 by genuinely attracting people than make it to 1,000 by people creating a bunch of accounts and getting me there through that mechanism.
Day 4 of the protest,
So,
and
if you did it, then great. If you didn't, then don't. Very, 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 very straightforwardly.
definitely not.
So you see how gummed up everything is, eh? Like, this is the thing that I think the vehicles have added that kind of a quality to it, right? When it's just people in the streets, it's people who are blocking everything, right? And it only takes a couple of trucks, right? And look, they've just shut the whole thing down. So I'm pretty impressed by it, man. Like, this is pretty crazy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to do it this way, see if I can. Because I want this to continue. And then I'm going to, whoops. See if we can get a 3. Yeah, this is going to be fine. Let's pull this over just a bit. Just a bit. We don't need to see the full thing. Yeah, that's great. That's great. So now I can continue on my stuff while simultaneously this is going on. How has this not been declared a public safety threat? Yeah, like the issue, Harry, is that this is a protest, right? And I understand why political leaders don't want to crack down on protest, right? That gets very, like, you want to see, especially a far-right organization and like right-wing kind of gathering of people, you want to see them really fucking lose their minds? You want to see them really blow up, right? Start declaring them like a public safety threat. Start actually trying to pull them off, right? The hope is that this energy will dissipate. That's really what it comes down to. That the political class doesn't need to actually get anything done about it, right? And Vince, you're raising an interesting point here. Do you have a source for this, bud? Trudeau's personal photographer, Adam Scotty, took the photo of the Confederate flag. Hold on. Because that's really interesting. Took Confederate flag photo. Because, like, how...
Jeep was sick.
Oh.
Sorry if I'm missing any of your messages. This chat is just way too
Conservative
long.
MP falsely accuses Trudeau of sending photographer to misrepresent convoy protesters. The Conservative MP joined a chorus of social media users falsely accusing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's official photographer of misrepresenting photographer. Adam Scotty is being accused online. Yeah, there's the accusation. Allegations are false. Scotty did not attend the protest. It's unfortunate the Prime Minister would send his personal photographer to misrepresent thousands of law-abiding, hardworking Canadian truckers and millions across the nation supporting them. But, like, and I'm more or less of the opinion that you don't need to fake this stuff. There's enough real shit. Like, I've seen enough shit that I consider to be real. Like, I've seen walkabout videos like this, and there's Confederate flags and all that kind of shit. Right? I've definitely seen that. I just think that these guys wised up. Right? Like, I think that they saw the blowback that was happening, and finally the leadership went through and was just like, okay, we got to get rid of this shit. Right? Which I said they should be doing at the beginning. Right? And that's the lesson for us. Right? The lesson for us is to make sure you explicitly, in almost every single communique, acknowledge what the unacceptable symbolism is, acknowledge what the unacceptable stuff is, and explicitly state in every communique that you don't want to see that shit, right? And make it explicit. Like, and that's what these guys didn't do. They never explicitly said, like, none of this Nazi shit, like, none of this tread on me, none of this Confederate flag shit, none of that. We're not going to accept that. They didn't actively work to distance themselves. And that's the learning moment, right? Like, think about how much more powerful this movement could have actually been, right? If they went down there and they were explicitly saying, like, none of this shit, none of this Nazi shit. And if anybody did show up with this, they actually, like, went after them and was like, no, fuck you, get out of here, right?
I think that's someone's alarm.
The thing is, the leaders denounced all of this they never covered any of it. I saw their denunciation, Vince. That's the reason why I've really softened up on them. But
Must be an alarm.
they did it after the fact. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was like 2-3 days in, and that's when they did it. And it's like, that's a pretty big whiff, Like, that's a pretty big whiff from just like an organizational standpoint. It really allowed their enemies to control the narrative, right? It really allowed them to control the narrative. And the leaders did show up, frequently called it at the time. Yeah. But and so Vince, I'm not going to disagree with you anymore, and all that. What I am going to say though is that now it's about us learning how to avoid that pitfall. And the way to avoid this pitfall is to get ahead of it, right? Anticipate that kind of a thing to happen and actively work to ensure that it's well understood that we are not interested in that shit. Because there isn't any of that communique that actually happened on the lead up, right? Maybe it was happening internally. Maybe. Like, maybe all of that kind of stuff. Like, maybe, right? But we don't know. And then you do have people like Pat King who are associated with this, right? You do have people who have like who definitely are of a more on the far right, like definitely are, and there's no denying it, and you can't deny it, and it just lets your enemies control the narrative. And so as we move forward, we need to be upfront and explicit about that. We can't fall into this trap, right? Because that diffused a lot of energy for this. Right? That diffused a lot of energy for this. That guy had a sign on the back of his truck that said Justin Castro for treason or something like that. Calling Justin Trudeau Justin Castro is hilarious, by the way. I actually think that's really funny. I can't believe they did this in January. The weather will kill any enthusiasm. I mean, they seem pretty fucking enthusiastic, bud. They got trucks. They can get heated up. All this kind of stuff. Dude, this is nuts. This is actually really nuts. Like, there's a lot of trucks and a lot of shit going on down there. Like, right now it looks calm, but that's because it's nighttime, right? And people are hunkering in. Trudeau. That's so funny, bud. All right. I'm going to clean this up a little bit quick. Clean this up. So let's have a talk about Trudeau's government has tried and failed to roll back the pink tide. All right, I'm gonna mute this finally. No, enough of the honking. Justin Trudeau's strategy in Latin America has been to attack the region's progressive governments. He has failed miserably. Now, as left-wing governments mount successive wins across the region, Ottawa may find it played the wrong hand. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau meets with self-declared Venezuelan President Juan Guaido in January 2020 in Ottawa, Canada. Yeah, this relationship, like, if anything really does show Trudeau as just like a stooge, it's this. Like, Juan Guaido is not the president of Venezuela. Like, he's not the interim president. He's not the anything. He's not even the leader of the opposition. Like, Juan Guaido is a nothing burger. He's literally of no consequence. When Juan Guaido stands up and says something, the people of Venezuela go, okay, bud, and then organize without him. That's what happens. Yeah, remember they said it was only a handful, and then they said 50 to 100. Yeah, and now look at this. Like, there's a huge amount of energy behind this, and it's undeniable. Justin Trudeau's Latin America strategy is in tatters. From the beginning of his time in office, Trudeau has launched attacks on what remain of the left-wing governments that came to power in Latin America over the course of the past 2 decades. His party has supported the overthrow of leftist governments in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Bolivia. But socialists remain in power in Venezuela, and leftists in the region have won a series of national elections. Progressive forces have defeated right-wing politicians in Honduras, Peru, Bolivia, and elsewhere. The push for regional integration is being rekindled. Recently, the community of Latin America and Caribbean states met in Argentina. Other than the United States and Canada, every single country in the hemisphere is a member of CELAC. 33 of the bloc's 34 nations were represented in Buenos Aires. Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro was absent. CELAC was founded in 2011 in Caracas, Venezuela, and immediately received plaudits from left-wing leaders such as Hugo Chavez, Rafael Correa, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, and Lula... Oh, man. Anyway, Canada's government is not alone in its hostility to the regional bloc, which many governments in the global north would like to see replaced with the US-dominated Organization of American States, OAS. But it is precisely the overreach of the OAS that has prompted the development of CELAC. Alan Coulim, Canada's special advisor on Venezuela and former ambassador to Venezuela, El Salvador, Guatemala, and the OAS, has publicly denounced the diplomatic forum. In a 2016 Senate Foreign Affairs Committee discussion of Argentina, Coulim stated that CELAC is not a positive organization within the Americas, mainly because it's built on the principle of exclusion. It purposefully excludes Canada and the United States. It was the product of President Chavez and the Chavista Bolivarian Revolution. Yeah, big surprise that the slaves would want to exclude their slavers. Coulim was correct in observing that CELAC's exclusion of Canada in the United States is intentional. What he failed to mention is that this exclusion is a response to decades of imperialistic plunder and political interference from the two nations. They do anti-Bolivarianism in different voices. How's that for a word? In 2017, the Liberals brought Coulim out of retirement to coordinate Canada's regime change efforts in Venezuela. Over the past 5 years, Ottawa has done its best to isolate Caracas, imposing sanctions, referring to the Venezuelan government to the International Criminal Court, financing often unsavory Venezuelan opposition parties, and deciding that a marginal opposition politician was the country's legitimate president. Canada's campaign, which has proved devastating for Venezuelans, has failed. Nicolas Maduro and the United Socialist Party of Venezuela are stronger today than at any point since opposition politician Juan Guaido declared himself president 3 years ago. The Lima Group, launched by Canada and Peru in 2017 as an ad hoc coalition of countries seeking to overthrow the Venezuelan government, has not met for over a year. The organization is effectively dead. After Pedro Castillo, a left-wing politician, won the presidential election in the summer, Peruvian Foreign Affairs Minister Hector Bejar called the Lima Group the most disastrous thing we have done in international politics in the history of Peru. A half-dozen countries have withdrawn from the Lima Group. Popular protests across the region have weakened many other member countries' commitments to the group's party. Argentina withdrew after Alberto Fernandez and Cristina Kirchner won the October 2019 election against Mauricio Macri. The wealthy businessman was handily defeated in a presidential election CBC labeled a loss for the Trudeau government. Meanwhile, Ottawa actively backed the ouster of Bolivia's first ever indigenous president, providing significant support for the OAS's efforts to discredit Evo Morales' 2019 election. This, in turn, fueled opposition protests that served as justification for the coup. Protests by social movements would, however, force the coup government to hold another election, handing Morales' Movimiento al Socialismo. Isn't it? I love it. I sucked at pronouncing that, but being able to be like, Socialismo, a second win. This turn of events greatly discredited the OAS and other coup supporters. As an alliance of wealthy white supremacists, Christian extremists, and North American interlopers overplayed its hand in Bolivia, Trudeau's anti-socialist ally in Chile was weakened by a popular uprising. 2 weeks into October 2019, demonstrations against Sebastián Piñera's government, Trudeau held a phone conversation with the remarkably unpopular president, who had just sent the Chilean army into the streets. At the time of the call, 19 people had already died, and dozens more were seriously injured, in protests that began against a hike in transit fares and morphed into a broader challenge to economic inequality. According to a published report of the conversation between the two premiers, Trudeau criticized election irregularities in Bolivia, used to justify removing Morales, and discussed the campaign to remove Venezuela's president. A Canadian press story noted that a summary from the Prime Minister's office of Trudeau's phone call with Piñera made no direct mention of the ongoing turmoil in Chile, a thriving country with which Canada has negotiated a free trade agreement. Trudeau only cares about the rule of law when it suits him. The Liberals may have stayed quiet on the fiercest repression in Chile since Augusto Pinochet, but the popular uprising the crackdown was supposed to quash was significant enough to force the Chilean government to organize a referendum on reforming the dictatorship's neoliberal constitution. Last month, leftist Gabriel Boric won the Chilean presidency by a significant margin. Inspired by their Chilean counterparts, protesters put far-right Colombian President Ivan Duque on the back foot in late 2019. After Duque won a close election, then Minister of Foreign Affairs Chrystia Freeland congratulated him and said Canada and Colombia share a commitment to democracy and human rights. In August 2018, Trudeau tweeted, "Today, Colombia's new president, Ivan Duque, took office and joins Swedish PM, Norway PM, Emmanuel Macron, Pedro Sanchez, and others with a gender-equal cabinet. Ivan, I look forward to working with you and your entire team." A month later, he added, "Thanks to President Ivan Duque for a great first meeting at UNGA this afternoon, focused on growing our economies, addressing the crisis in Venezuela, and strengthening the friendship between Canada and Colombia." Sadly for Trudeau, convivial overtures of this sort may soon fall on deaf ears. In what could upend decades of right-wing dominated Colombian national politics, leftist candidate Gustavo Petro is leading polls for the May presidential election. Attempts to turn the pink tide by hook or by crook. In November of last year, Daniel Ortega was re-elected president of Nicaragua. 2 years ago, Ottawa severed aid and sanctioned officials from Nicaragua, the government of which former U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton listed as part of a troika of tyranny, along with Venezuela and Cuba. While there is an authoritarian streak to Ortega's policies, his government is part of the Venezuela-led Bolivian Alliance for the People of Our America, ALBA. The alliance developed in response to North American domination of the hemisphere. 6 weeks ago, Canada's Lima Group ally in Honduras fell when Xiomara Castro won the presidency. In 2017, Freeland was quick to recognize Juan Orlando Hernandez after he defied the Honduran constitution by running for a second term as president and then brazenly stole the election. Castro is the wife of former President Manuel Zelaya, who was removed by the military in 2009 on the grounds that he was seeking to defy the Constitution by running for a second term. In fact, the Social Democratic president, who had recently joined ALBA, simply put forward a plan to hold a non-binding public poll on whether to hold consultations to reopen the Constitution. Backed by Ottawa and Washington, the move against Zelaya was the beginning of a series of unconstitutional or quasi-constitutional coups that played an important role in reversing Latin America's pink tide. In June 2012, the left-leaning president of Paraguay, Fernando Lugo, was ousted in what some call a parliamentary coup. A few years later, Ecuador swung to the right when Rafael Correa's former vice president, Lenin Moreno, won the presidency. With Correa's backing, Moreno then carried out a stunning political about-face, forcing Correa out of the country and blocking his party from elections. Most significant for the geopolitics of the region, Brazilian Workers' Party President Dilma Rousseff was impeached through a soft coup in 2016. A little more than a year into her second four-year term, parliamentarians voted Rousseff out after finding her guilty of breaking Brazil's budget laws. The impeachment was sparked by an economic downturn and the massive car wash corruption probe that targeted various politicians, including her Workers' Party predecessor, Lula da Silva. There was no evidence Rousseff was corrupt, and the case against former President Lula was flimsy. The lead prosecutor, Sergio Moro, who under the Brazilian system also acts as a judge, later became justice minister in the Jair Bolsonaro government. In 2019, The Intercept released a trove of communications from Moro, confirming the political nature of the charges against Lula, which had also been used to weaken Rousseff prior to her impeachment. While they made dozens of statements criticizing irregularities in Venezuela, the Trudeau government remained silent about the equally murky impeachment of Rousseff and was unfazed by the persecution of the left more broadly. Canada began negotiations to join the Brazilian-led Mercosur trade bloc just after Venezuela was expelled. They also held the Canada-Brazil Strategic Dialogue Partnership. In October 2018, Freeland met her Brazilian counterpart to discuss, among other issues, pressuring the Venezuelan government. She tweeted, "Canada and Brazil enjoy a strong friendship, and we are thankful for your support in defending the international rules-based order and holding Maduro regime in Venezuela to account. Under Bolsonaro, Brazil would join the Lima Group." In 2018, the openly sexist, racist, and stridently anti-environmentalist Bolsonaro won the presidential election, largely because the frontrunner in the polls was in jail. Former Workers' Party President Lula da Silva, who ended his second term with an 83% approval rating, was blocked from running due to politically motivated corruption charges. The Trudeau government was publicly silent on Lula's imprisonment. The night before the Supreme Court was set to determine Lula's fate, the general in charge of the army hinted at military intervention if the judges ruled in favor of the popular former president. Not even this development was criticized by Ottawa. The courts have since annulled the convictions against Lula, and the polls suggest he will trounce Bolsonaro in the presidential vote scheduled for October. After backing numerous failed and dubious contenders, it still remains unlikely that Trudeau's Liberals will change their Latin American geopolitical strategy. Canada's policy in the region has long been shaped by Washington and the economic interests of Canadian capitalists. It suits Canada's banks, mining companies, and other corporations to crush efforts that seek economic and political independence from U.S. empire. This is Yves Engler's latest book. He's Stand on Guard for Whom? The People's History of the Canadian Military. Another banger from Yves Engler, man. Like, this guy, he knows what's up. He knows what's up. Like, that was a really great article, man. Sometimes you read an article like that, and it just makes your vocabulary better, right? That's the beauty of reading out loud, right? And the beauty of reading generally, right, is that it just makes your vocabulary better. And I find myself, like, when I read something like that out loud, I find it like I want to use bigger words more often, right? That's exactly what it does for me. Yet when Guaido calls people to go on the streets, hardly anyone attends and they laugh at him. Yeah, he's become like the butt. The butt of many classic jokes now, right? Like, anytime anything kind of fraudulent happens in the online circles that I'm in, it's like, hey guys, Juan Guaido was announced to be the president of whatever Whoistan, and it's just like a big fucking joke now because it's so obvious. Like, it's so fucking blatantly obvious that it's false, right? Justin Trudeau was born in 1971. His family met Castro in 1976. Fidel must have been a time-traveling Lothario, a birth more intriguing than the virgin birth of Christ himself. Hey, Fidel Castro, man. He's a real man's man. Phoenix Ignis. Oh, wow, that's a real good name. That's a great name, dude. Phoenix Ignis. I don't know if I've ever seen you around here. Maybe I have. In either case, glad you're here. The U.S. refused to join CELAC. Even Xi Jinping sent a message in one of the meetings. Yeah, the U.S. and Canada refused to join CELAC while President Xi Jinping participated. So the exclusion crap at the start of the article is BS. I believe you, bud. Like, Canada and the United States, they don't want to join any organization that's actually interested in forwarding the objectives of the people of the countries that they want to dominate, right? Like, capitalism wants to go in, dominate and destroy and steal as many resources as it can. That's what it wants. Like, it's not interested in negotiating in good faith for the benefit of the people who actually live in the country. That's not what they're interested in. Like, what they don't want to see is they don't want to see like a Colombia or a Venezuela that's safe, secure, that is making its own people rich, where its own people are doing well, and then trade with those people. That's what they don't want to see, right? I tend to just lurk around here. I think I participated in your chat one time before. Either way, bud, I'm glad to have you here, man. I know that there are lurkers out there. If you're one of the people who are lurking, and I know you're out there, I love you all the same. I want you to know that. I know that you don't feel like you need to participate or join into the chat, and I'm not asking you to. I'm just happy you're there, listening to the smooth tunes from John Sanderson. This is John Radio. All John. All the time. Jon Radio. Sometimes I worry about myself, man. Sometimes I worry about myself. You know what, man? It is really nice to see the Parliament building. I gotta tell you. Like, I'm glad that this fella's walking around doing this, showing what's what. Because, like, it's nice. It's just nice to see the Parliament building. Oh, I didn't even realize it's under construction. Look at that. It's been so long since I've actually seen these buildings. And they're beautiful buildings, eh? Like, they've got that real, like, they're of that period, right? They're of that period. Like, this is like a Big Ben kind of thing going on here. John is entertaining himself again. Yeah, dude. What do you think? What do you think I'm doing here? Have a good one, Dan. Good to see you, bud. Good luck tomorrow. Continuous hits. And the hits keep on coming. How Canada can give land back. Oh, that's a big, long one. Like, I really appreciate why someone took the time to write this article, right? Like, and I really do, like, as Indigenous rights continue to gain support, what would a policy agenda for land restitution look like? But, like, no one is interested in doing that in Canada, right? Like, they're like very, 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 very small groups. Because, like, I'm more or less of the opinion, like, fuck, man, like, give these First Nations people their land back, man. Like, just do it. I don't care. I don't understand why anybody would care, right? Like, we don't live there. Like, who's actually affected by this? Oh, it's the capitalist death cult because they can't exploit the resources in that region anymore. Oh, cool, bro. Cool story, bro. So I'm not going to, because this is a big fucking long. Could a more concrete policy agenda contribute to changing that? While it's a clear-cut agenda for land back has yet to emerge, Indigenous activists, and you know what's killing me? I gotta pee. That's what's really killing me. Here, I got a great video going on here. This is No War with Russia. This is an emergency rally that was held in Toronto about what's being called the Ukrainian crisis.
Canada out of NATO.
This is the Communist Party, of course, doing this. So I'm going to put this on.
You know, people say, well, if there's not going to be a Russian invasion, and there's nothing to this, then why should we worry? Well, here's why we should worry, folks. Here's why we should worry. Because when you have a circumstance like this, with more arms being shipped to Ukraine, to Latvia, to Poland, and to other frontline states of NATO's expansion into Eastern Europe, and you have nuclear weapons there, any miscalculation, any provocation could lead to a war. It could even be a mistake, but it could lead to a war.
Millions of people have died and even more have been displaced by NATO bombs in Yugoslavia, Syria, Iraq, and Libya. These wars are decided on by the rich and fought by the working class. As I'm speaking, Canada, along with other NATO forces, are conducting war games in Ukraine under the guise of defense against Russia. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, NATO has expanded eastward to the border with Russia. It's not too hard to figure out how the US would react if Russia entered a military alliance with Mexico and stationed troops at its border.
Right.
We know that NATO is not a defensive alliance, but an offensive alliance serving the interests of Western imperialism. We know that the military-industrial complex is the world's largest polluter. We know that NATO member countries do not hesitate to use racism, xenophobia, and Islamophobia to justify their wars. We know that NATO member countries prioritize military spending over social services. They alone account for 56% of military spending worldwide. Shame!
Shame!
That we don't have a foreign policy of our own anymore. We have a North American foreign policy, and it's determined in Virginia and in Washington, and that's the problem.
Shame!
Now, I've been around for a while, and some of you have too, I can see. And you may remember that when Canadian parliaments were talking about things like the war in Vietnam, or the war in Korea even, there were other voices that could be heard in Parliament. But today there are no other voices. There could be. The NDP is still there. The Green Party is there. They say they're for peace. The Bloc is there. Well, we know about the Conservatives, so we won't worry about them. They're the biggest hawks of all. But where are the other voices? These people are not victims of disinformation. They have access to the information. They can get it if they want to. This is a really dangerous situation where Parliament is so quiet. And it fits with what they did with respect to the Uyghur people on the motion on China. You know, declaring that there was a genocide in China. Well, if you look into it, you'll find out that's not the truth either. But there was a genocide in Canada. So where's all the big noise about that?
And in Palestine.
And in Palestine and in other places. And that our country is involved in.
Yeah.
Right? And in terms of Indigenous people responsible for it. So what's the message here? Well, we need to build up the peace movement in this country. And I can remember, and some of you will remember, 20 years ago, we had a huge peace movement in this country. Hundreds of thousands of people would come out to protest Canadian foreign policy and U.S. foreign policy and push that Canada should not adopt U.S. foreign policy.
This is the Communist Party of Canada.
Questions. But it's this disinformation campaign which has confused people, made it difficult for them to know what is the truth. So demonstrations like today are very important because we can give people the accurate information. But it can't just stop today. We have to push the government. We have to do more protests. Go to Jolly's office, and I understand in Montreal that's one of the things that they're planning to do today. And other cabinet ministers. We have to push back, and we have to find the ways to let people know what is the real situation there, and what's a reasonable position in terms of finding a peaceful solution for us to adopt, for Canada to press. We have a minority government, and this is a good thing today because it means they're subject to pressure. And we need to press Canada, the Canadian government, and the NDP and the Greens and the Bloc to say, we don't want to be involved in this dirty war. Woo-hoo! We want Canadian troops to be returned to Canada. Yes. We don't want those sanctions canceled. And we want Canada to get out of NATO. And we want an independent Canadian foreign policy of peace and disarmament. And by God, folks, we're going to have to organize and work. Because it isn't going to happen without the mass pressure of the Canadian people, of working people, on this government and on this military. And don't forget, the other upside is if we free all those funds up for what Andrew was talking about, free tuition and a national child care program that's public and affordable social housing and job creation, all those things we could be doing with that money instead of killing people and endangering the world. Thank you.
No more NATO! No more NATO!
So that's the Communist Party of Canada, right? Easy to find. You can see they have 1.9 subscribers, so double my subscriber count. Let's overtake them. Yeah, and we blame others of the crimes we engage in. Yeah, that's that's like politics 101, especially fascist politics, right? Accuse other people of that for which you are guilty of, right? Like that's so that once, if they accuse you, right, then it looks like they're doing a like, I'm rubber, you're glue, right? Then it has that kind of quality about it. So you acknowledge your own sins by accusing other people of it. That's how you roll, right? That's you can be pretty successful in politics if that's the way you roll, right? If you're good at gaslighting, if you're good at deflection, if you're good at those sorts of things, you can get pretty far, right? And you can see that every so often. I got a right winger in here who utilizes all of those tactics, right? Deflection, gaslighting, all that kind of stuff. Right? Because they know they can't answer questions directly. They know they can't actually talk about things openly. Because if they did, it would be pretty obvious what their positioning actually was. Right? The Ukrainian situation, I actually listened to a... what was his name? It was John something. John Mershimer. I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, but this fella, if you are really interested in listening to some really straight up takes from somebody who is just laying it out, not bullshitting anybody, just calling it how he sees it, this guy's great, right? He's not anti-American by any stretch of the imagination, but he definitely is telling the truth, right? And he definitely sees... He wishes that things were going America's way, but he definitely... And his take on why Ukraine's is the West's fault, very worthwhile if you want a good idea as to what's going on in Ukraine and that whole struggle. His take is basically that NATO and America stumbled into the weeds in Ukraine and experienced a blowback from the international community and from Russia that they didn't expect. Which... when I kind of think about it, I see what he is talking about, right? That NATO and America saw Ukraine as an independent organization or an independent nation and thought to itself, well, we could go in there and make it a NATO ally, right? Get it into NATO and all that kind of stuff. And they didn't quite realize that Russia was sitting there being like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You are not going to have a NATO nation right on our fucking borders, right? We are not going to have a nation that an organization, NATO, which was created in order to fight the Soviet Union, right? It's a Cold War organization. No, we are not going to allow that organization to have a country on our borders. And his position, John McNamara, what's his goddamn name? It'd be so much better if I could pronounce this. John Mershimer. His take is very simply that if NATO is going to push forward in Ukraine and attempt to make Ukraine a partner or a NATO partner, Russia will destroy Ukraine. Right? They're not going to invade Ukraine. But there are many ways to destroy Ukraine. And they're basically going to make it so that the West can't actually organize. It's very much the same strategy that the United States is using in the Middle East. That if we just destroy the Middle East, then Russia and China can't successfully organize those nations. Right? And in the end, his take is very much that the United States and NATO should just fuck off. They should let Ukraine be independent. They should let Ukraine make its own decisions, right? Maintain peace in the region, right? And I mean, it makes total sense that Russia would be like, yeah, no, we're not going to let the United States and NATO put like fucking nuclear bombs on our border, right? We're just not going to do that. we're not going to let NATO have a big say as to what happens. Yeah, unmarked graves of indigenous children and people saying it's a dubious claim. Ask them what their schools did when a child died at school. Yeah, was the family allowed to retrieve the body? Ask them what their schools did when a child died at school. Was the family allowed to retrieve? Oh, you're saying like what those residential schools did when a child died? Was the family allowed to retrieve the body? Interesting. Yeah, what did happen to those bodies? And honestly, dude, the people who are walking around saying that it's a dubious claim, these mass graves, all this kind of stuff, like, we literally have like doctors who were going into those residential schools and coming out saying like plenty of people are dying. Like it's like brutal, right? Like we actually have eyewitness accounts. We actually have like it's fairly well documented. No, our white schools. Oh man, I have no idea, dude. Like when a child dies at school, free Mr. Wilson. Who's Mr. Wilson, bud? I don't know what that's in reference to. And so somebody in the Discord wanted me to share this. I'm going to extend this out, so just blanket the walk for just a second. This is the Consumer Price Index annual average, not seasonally adjusted. Really pointing out the prices are going up. Like all items, food, shelter, right? 2019, we're at 136. 2020, 137. 2021, 141.6. Right? And this is almost true across the board. There are some gasoline, for example, has like a real erratic sort of 170, dips down to 146, and then shoots right back up to 192. Right? God, what would you do if your child never came home? Oh, Bud Harry, that's like cutting deep, eh? Like that's just like people really do not want to talk about the like this. This reminds me of the story. I've told this story a bunch on this, so forgive me if you've all heard it, but I'm going to tell it again anyway. There was a First Nations fella on one of the First Nations reserves around Portage Prairie. Portage Prairie has like 3 or 4 First Nations reserves around it, and the closest one I would drive through with my family every single day, and there was this one house that would be destroyed like regularly. The guy would blow holes in the side of it. And like I'm not talking like punching holes. I'm talking like taking a shotgun and blowing holes in the side of the house kind of stuff. And the general attitude of everybody around was, this is so wasteful. He's just going to destroy it, all this kind of stuff. And as a kid, I didn't understand really what was going on or anything like this. So, I didn't question it. And then you find out about the 60s scoop. You find out that this guy was kidnapped as a child and thrust into a residential school system. And now he's been released from the residential school system and lives on the reserve and lives in a house given to him by the people who kidnapped him. Right? And so my response to these people who have always said, oh, why do we keep giving this guy a new house? Why do we keep fixing his stuff up? He's just going to blow it up again. My response is, yeah. Yep. And we're going to give him a new house every single time. He's going to blow a hole in the side of that house. He's going to destroy the inside of it. He's going to rip it apart. He's going to tear it down. He can burn it down to the ground, and we'll give him a new one so he'll do it again. And it doesn't matter how many times he does it. It doesn't matter how often he does it. We'll do it again. And even if he spends the rest of his life doing that, it still won't pay back the life that we stole from him. Like, absolutely, that man should destroy every house we give him. Absolutely. Abso-fucking-lutely. And what would I do if my child never came home, right? Like, I can't imagine why an entire generation of First Nations people are falling into alcoholism, right? I can't imagine why the drug use is rampant. I can't imagine, right? Could it have to be the rampant kidnapping that occurred? Like, literally the same time that the Beatles are traveling around North America, touring, right? We're kicking in doors and stealing kids. Like, that's what we're doing, right? And those residential schools didn't get shut down literally the year that The Lion King was in theaters, right? Like, really fucking think about this. The year that The Lion King was in theaters. the last residential schools get shut down. Right? Around there. Maybe I'm off by a year here or there. But like I'm literally in a movie theater watching like, it's a Benya, Mama right? And they're just shutting down the last of these schools. 1996, yeah, that's Lion King, right? I might be off a year here or there, but still, the point stands, for God's sakes, right? Whether it's Aladdin or Beauty and the Beast or the fucking Lion King or Hunchback of Notre Dame, right? Like that whole era, like that should blow your fucking brain out. That like the kidnapping schools, the schools where we kidnapped children, didn't stop. And have they actually stopped? Like the church schools shut down, but the state-run enterprises still exist, right? Did they shut the schools down, or did they just secularize the project? That's my question, right? Did they actually shut these schools down permanently, or did they just secularize the project and move everybody into state-run facilities? I know people who work in those facilities. Right? They're good people, and they're trying their best. But it's hard to ignore the history that exists there. Right? And sure, there's a degree of like, and what's frustrating about this conversation, oh, looks like we've lost the walk. Let's leave this for now. We'll see if it comes back. What's frustrating about this whole conversation is when the conservative individualists get involved, right? And they get all very, very much like, well, those people should bootstrap and pull up and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, dude, like those people have experienced like enormous trauma, right? Like that's an enormous trauma, a trauma that we don't have in our lives. Like not even close, right? Not even close. Like not only are we talking about like kidnapping, right? And a cultural genocide. Like we're talking about literally everybody going through the same thing. Like it's a cultural trauma. Like we talk about the trauma we're all going through collectively with COVID right now, right? And how we're going to be talking about this for years, and how we're going to be dealing with this for years, and how there's going to be big conversations and big kind of things that fall out, and how we learned a lot about ourselves during this period of time. And this isn't even remotely close to an external force kicking in your doors and stealing your children. Right? Like, Jesus fucking Christ. Like, Jesus fucking Christ. And the multi-generational trauma of dispossession of land, yeah, children and culture, absolutely. All that shit, man. Like, the steady erosion of where you're even allowed to go, where you're even allowed to live, what land is considered yours. The destruction of your governmental systems, the destruction of your ruling class, the destruction of your culture, the destruction of all of it, right? Like everything your people knew is washed away, and in the case of the residential schools, like very directly, very very directly, and the people who stand up and act as like apologists for it are disgusting. They're just disgusting people. Like we don't need to tolerate them, right? This is why I think someone like Aaron O'Toole can never actually be the Prime Minister of Canada. Like here's a guy who stood up and said very recently said that the residential school system was erected with good intentions. Like that's blisteringly ignorant to say. Blisteringly ignorant. You literally just need to read the statements that were made in Parliament before the vote was taken to understand that that's completely false. That the First Nations people were seen as a nuisance, that they were seen as a problem that needed to be that we needed to have a final solution to resolve, and that the residential school system was seen as the way to cleanse the Indian, right? Like, absolutely under no circumstances at any point were we thinking this is for the benefit of the First Nations people. And if we were fucking deluded about it. Like, it's fucking brutal. Yeah, stealing your children or women, killing or imprisoning your men. And it's the RCMP as well as the priests. Like, really think about this shit, man. Like, really think about that. That's crazy. Like, the police forces allied with the moral leaders of the community. Yeah, that happened a long time ago. Get over it. If you want to talk about genocide, look what China's doing to the yogurts. That's funny, dude. The yogurts. That's hilarious. The yogurts. Fuck, man. No, I'm like, and the thing that pisses me off so much about the 60s scoop and about the kind of the not kind of but about the cultural genocide, about all of this is how much bullshit, like how much bullshit there is, right? Like when I was growing up as a kid, I was generally taught that like First Nations people were just dingy people. That's more or less what I was taught, right? That there was no compassion or consideration or anything surrounding the idea that like, yeah, we fucked these people up. Like that conversation was just non-existent, right? And part of the reason, like if I wanted to be nice to the rural Manitoban types, right? If I wanted to be nice to them, they had no fucking idea what was happening. Like, and I think that that's true. Like, I think that the people who are like recent immigrants heading out to Manitoba who are being told by the Canadian government, hey, come out here, we'll give you some land, right? They had no fucking idea what was happening. Like, I've heard stories from people in my rural communities about how like the First Nations conversation kind of came about and how they started hearing about things like the 60s scoop. And they're just like, I've never heard about this. What are you even talking about? Right? And so like these kinds of crazy things can happen right under the nose of the population. And they just don't notice. And this is what we're talking about when we're talking about white privilege. Right? That like white people didn't know because they didn't need to know. Because they didn't care to know. Because it didn't affect them. It didn't matter to them. They were just going around living their lives. And all they ever saw of these First Nations people were people collapsing in an absolute pit of despair. Right? Yeah. Indigenous people were prisoners on their reserves for 70 years. Not able to do anything without the Indian agent's approval. Exactly. And like, yeah, that's going to lead to like severe drug use and severe like self-mutilation and severe destructive behaviors. Like pretty clearly. Like this to me is the most outrageous part about it, is like all of the destructive behaviors that is visible in the First Nations people. Like I look at now and I completely, I'm just like, yeah, of course. And I go back home to where, you know, the rural Manitobans are not there. They still have this kind of like negative perspective of the First Nations people who are around them. And like, I'll never forget. Like, my partner at the time, she was working as a manager at a pizza joint, right? And a First Nations gentleman came in and was obviously drunk. And he was just asking, "Hey, can I call someone to come pick me up?" Right? And she was just, she's from Toronto. She's like, "Yeah." And so there's the phone, right? He calls somebody. He's drunkenly calling someone. As he's doing this, and he's not causing a fuss, not causing anybody any problems at all. He's just a drunk dude trying to get a phone call, right? And he calls his daughter to come pick him up. While he is waiting for his daughter to come, someone else comes and picks up a pizza and calls the cops on this guy. This guy who's just literally standing there being drunk. That's it. This First Nations guy standing in a pizza place, he's drunk. He's not causing problems for anyone. Right? While the cops are coming, his daughter shows up. And he's drunk, so it's taking a little bit of time to actually get into the car and all this. The cops show up, arrest the First Nations fella, right? And you know he's going to end up in the drunk tank, and you know he's going to end up in this bad kind of situation. And to hear her tell the story, she's just like, I could see it on this daughter's face. I could see it. Like, oh no, not again. Like, come on, can't you just let us get in the car? Can't you just let me take him home? Right? Nope. The cops pick this guy up, and what are they going to do with him? They're going to put him in the drunk tank, and how long are they going to leave him there? Or maybe they'll take him on a Starlight tour. Right? Maybe they'll take him on a Starlight tour. For those of you who don't know, the Starlight tours made popular in Saskatchewan. What would happen is a police officer would pick up a First Nations fella, right? Drive him outside of the town. And like, we're talking like, you know, negative 40 temperatures, all this kind of stuff, and drop them off miles out of the town, force them to walk home. Some of these guys froze to death, right? In the middle of nowhere. Exactly. And the story that I just told you about this drunk fella, like, I look at that and I'm like, yeah, yeah, that guy's probably experienced some pretty massive trauma in his life, right? Yeah, he's going to be drunk. Yeah. And then the idea that some like white dude can just call the cops and the cops come and just like no questions asked, no, doesn't even ask the staff, doesn't anything. Literally all they see is a drunk Indian. That's all they see. And they just pick the guy up and they don't listen to the daughter and they don't care. They just take him out. And that happened like 5 years ago, right? That's not that long ago at all. Right? And so you wonder why these people are in despair. And that's what it is. They're in despair. Right? Of course they're in despair. Like, if that First Nations fella had been a drunk white guy, right? Causing no problems, not doing anything, right? Asked for a phone call, got the phone call. That white guy probably would have come in, got his pizza, turned around and left. Maybe he would have gone like, drunk idiot. But would he have called the cops? Probably not. And even if he did, right? Would the cops have come? And even if they did, they'd probably be like, hey, well, is this guy causing any problems? Well, what's the problem? And even if they did get him in the car, you know where they would take him? To his house. That's where they take him. For sure. Now I'm stuck until uh-oh. You doing okay, Eric? Exactly, Branwyn. The police would have come and taken him home. Right? Which they could have very easily done for that First Nations fella. Right? In fact, a good police officer would have shown up, seen the daughter, been like, oh, are you taking him back home? Oh, well, okay. And that would have been the end of that story. That's not what happened. It's not what happened. And like, it drives me mental that there are people in the conversation, or people who feel like they should get in the conversation, who are actually just in denial about what happened to these people. It would be like saying of a person who was hit by a car that they should just get back up and continue on their way. Eric, my car broke down and my curl is broken. You okay, bud? Like, your car broke down. Are you okay? Like, genuinely, bud, are you okay? Like, your car broke down. Do you need an assistance? I don't know how to assist you. Like, are you okay? Do you need somebody to come and help you, bud? Maybe stop using your cell energy on this and start using your cell energy to call CAA or something, bud. Eric adding a little levity to the conversation. Definitely. No, and straight up, like, Aaron O'Toole can never be the Prime Minister of Canada because of that statement alone. Like, as far as I'm concerned. Like, no, you do not get to deal with high-level difficult cultural laws and issues while pretending as though, well, we meant we meant well, No, we fucking didn't. Not even a little. Yet not only ignorant of the trauma caused, but oblivious of their participation in the continuing drama. Yeah, or trauma rather. Yeah. Yeah. And like, nothing gets me more riled up with these guys than when they deny this systemic issues. Right? When they deny the systemic issues. Like, and it's as easy. It really is as easy as like, hey, like, the Indian Act still exists. Like, that's a law. That's a set of laws that still exist, that we're still operating under, right? Like, that are explicitly racist. Like, explicitly. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about systemic racism, right? And you can't just shrug and be like, well, that was those guys, right? Yeah, those guys passed legislation that we're still enforcing. Do you think we should stop that? And if your answer is no, well, then you might be part of the problem, eh, bud? All right, Eric's waiting for the tow truck. Good stuff, Eric. I don't want you to be abandoned, bud. I'm just like, it would hurt my heart if you were like trying to reach out to me to be like, oh my God, John, help me, Jonathan. And I'm like, I don't know, ignoring it or whatever. I do want to say that the last time that I was in Manitoba, I was seeing positive things. That what's going on in Manitoba, first of all, they created the Human Rights Museum, is in Winnipeg, Manitoba. The Truth and Reconciliation movement is real in Manitoba. It's not like it is federally, where they're just fucking pandering to it or just mouthing it to it. They're actually doing serious shit. I've seen a commitment to building better housing, to building better places for the First Nations people, right? Trying to find a way to get them away from the sort of repressive systems that are keeping them clamped down, trying to find a way to allow them to explore their, well, allow them to, but to get rid of the things that are preventing them from exploring their culture and getting their history and all of this. And really what I really noticed the last time I was in Winnipeg was when I would be around First Nations people. Like, when I was younger, when I was growing up, there was always this like us-them energy. There was always this us-them energy, right? Even though I didn't fully understand it, right? But I really did feel like when I was walking around Winnipeg, I would be around First Nations people, and that energy wasn't really there anymore. Or it was diminished. That the simple acknowledgement that this was the history, that this is the history of Canada and the relations between the First Nations people and the white colonizers. And yes, it's the truth that I did not I didn't come overseas and colonize and do any of that stuff. But I do benefit from that, and that there are laws that still exist. There are things that still exist in the society that we need to rectify and we need to face up to and tell the truth about and actually seek to be rid of and be done with. And if you're going to stand in front of me and deny the history and then simultaneously deny how that history connects to this moment, then I don't think you're a serious person. Or I think you're a very serious person, just not in the way that I think you would like to be serious. Because at least don't stand in the way, right? At least don't stand in the way. Like, I can understand if you don't want to actively pursue the change, but at least don't get in the way. Leonard Peltier has cover. They're calling for his release again. 43 years in prison. Leonard Peltier has COVID. They're calling for his release again. 43 years in prison. I don't think I know who this person is, bud. Leonard Peltier. He's an American Indian activist and a mainstay member of the American Indian movement who, following a controversial trial, was convicted of aiding and abetting murder and has been imprisoned since 1977. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of life imprisonment for aiding and abetting, resulting in the death of 2 Federal Bureau of Investigation agents in a June 26, 1975 shooting on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. In his 1999 memoir, Prison Writings, My Life is My Sun Dance, Peltier admitted to participating in the shootout, but said he did not kill the FBI agents. Human rights watchdogs, such as Amnesty International, and political figures, including Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, and the 14th Dalai Lama, have campaigned for clemency for Peltier in recent decades. Yeah, this has all the hallmarks of just a scapegoat, right? It's how do we get this guy? Peltier ran for president of the United States, winning the nomination of the Peace and Freedom Party, and received 27,000 votes, limited to a ballot in California. Wow, baller. Absolutely baller. Robbie Robertson did an album about him. Baller. Yeah. This is the thing. There's always another person. There's always something. Like, I just recently learned about Tim Buck, for example. Right? Tim Buck in communist circles is legendary, right? Like he was a communist throughout the 1930s. The Prime Minister of Canada, Bennett, picked him up, and him and 7 other guys, and just arrested him. Why? Because he was a communist. Right? You want to talk about cancel culture, right? Like this cancel culture that these right-wing snowflakes keep whining about, right? They don't understand what cancel culture looks like. This is what cancel culture looks like. You got the original prosecutor of his case said he made mistakes and has campaigned to set him free. Yeah. God. Well, guys, we've reached the end of this one. Thank you so much for being here, guys. You guys are the real sunshine of this whole thing. Absolutely. Yeah, it's so nice to have these conversations, to learn more about these things. Oh, God, yeah, the witnesses admit they lied. Come on now. Like, come on. Always remember, each and every one of you is a quantum being walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the vain hope that you'll never realize it. Because if you do, then you won't let yourself become a commodity for them. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.